Perhaps we can call the meeting to order.
No, Josh is gonna, we're just gonna get rid of this. And Josh
We'll need a couple more people sitting in their seats. I'll take a motion to allow for ice cream within the horseshoe. Approved. I didn't. I did not. Well, what's against the rule? It's fine. Other members of the Toronto and East York Community Council, if they could come to Committee Room 1. We're going to get started here. First, are there any declarations of interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Yeah. Seeing none, we don't have minutes to introduce, no? No, we do not. We're going to, we've got some deputants on the item, but first, I think probably what we should do is take the presentations from staff, and then we'll go to deputations, then we'll loop back in for questions of staff and go from there. Make sense? Yeah? So likely first up is Stephen Buckley, the General Manager of Transportation. Mr. Buckley, go right ahead.
Good evening, Council. I'm here to, I'll quickly do I have about 15 slides that I'll run through, just quickly summarizing the report. I'll go through it quickly. There's not a lot of new information in here. There's one slide that we've included that shows a different way of slicing the statistics, so I'll highlight that when I get to it. So again, just key considerations from the report that we wanted to highlight out of the gate. That only a small percentage of pedestrian and cycling fatalities in Toronto East York occur on local or collector roadways, and this is based on the latest 2009 to 2013 data. Roughly 9% of pedestrian fatalities and 0% of cycling fatalities occurred on local or collector roads. Our concern is artificially lowering speed limits on local roads may not achieve the resulted desire by the community. Modifications being proposed will have a cost to implement, and while the cost is not extremely large. Again, it's just one consideration about how we use our dollars to, again, achieve the goal I think we're trying to achieve. And again, just summarizing the report recommendation that was included in there. So again, a little bit of the history on this was the speed limit reduction to 30 kilometers per hour that is currently being considered on local and collector roads was part of a 2002 traffic calming policy that was adopted. More recently, Toronto East York has asked for a 30 kilometer per hour speed limit on certain roads in the absence of traffic calming, and so this report is based on that. And again, highlighting that the Board of Health had advocating for lower speeds to reduce injuries and fatalities. And one key recommendation from there was that the General Manager of Transportation be asked to consider reducing vehicular speeds to 30 kilometers per hour on residential streets and a citywide speed limit of 40 kilometers per hour on all other streets unless otherwise posted. The Council direction, Public Works and Infrastructure at its March 4th, 2014 requested Transportation Services to report to the Public Works and Infrastructure Committee in January of 2015 with a set of criteria under which a 30 kilometer per hour speed limit.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, could we ask the General Manager to maybe reduce his speed a little? Yeah.
I'd ask him, but I don't think it would work.
Just have we got this somewhere,
Also, we need
Mr.
the
Chair?
The presentation?
Yes.
I don't know. Are there physical copies?
We
of the
have a
presentation
copy
to be
available for
distributed?
the members.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, because at the time we weren't sure whether or not this was going to be adopted. We did not submit it to clerks. So we can, and my apologies for that. That was a last minute decision. So
Can we flip a copy of it to clerks and we can?
Sorry, I'm not
Make
sure what
copies?
you mean by adopted, but this is, this is a presentation, so. It's 150 pages. This?
no,
This is 15.
no, 15. So is there an
So,
I can email to.
okay, why don't we worry about that when the presentation's done, and then we'll have some time to digest before the questions.
And And Counselor, because this wasn't officially submitted and we didn't know whether or not council was going to approve the presentation.
Sure.
Okay. So again, I'll step back here.
We don't approve.
That we were asked to report back in January of 2015 with a set of criteria under which 30 kilometers per hour could be recommended in the absence of physical traffic calming measures. So staff have been actually working on this for over a year prior to this coming in. In the meantime, there had been a recommendation to report to Toronto East York on this issue. So the reason that this came to Toronto East York a little later is because we were actually in the process of formulating the criteria to begin with. So to report back in the absence of that would have been premature. The 30 kilometer per hour speed limit policy had several warrants that were established. One was a petition to show local community support. Second was a roadway environment that we felt was sort of necessary to send the right, I'll say, physical signals to the drivers about driving conditions. And then warrants C and D involved identifying school and cycling environments and pedestrian and traffic environments. And so the policy that was approved by council must pass 3 of the 4 warrants. Warrants A and B were mandatory, and one of C or D would be required. So again, this just quickly summarizes the warrants that were identified. The petition required support of 25% of affected households, or 10% in the case of multiple family rental dwellings, and ensures that the only proposals supported by the community are investigated by staff. Warrant B was road environment, which all 4 elements must be met: a local and collector road, pavement width of 8.5 meters or less, 85th percentile speeds no higher than 50 kilometers per hour, and maximum traffic volumes of 8,000 vehicles per day. The C and D warrants, again, related to one of the 3 criteria was a school zone around parkland or involving cycling facilities. Warrant D was pedestrian and traffic environment, where 3 of the 4 elements, the absence of sidewalks, significant parking activity, horizontal curvature in the roads, or a lack of safe stopping distance would be met. So these are directly from the report. As you can see, that what we were trying to highlight in here, in this graphic, was that roughly less than 10% of fatal collisions involving pedestrians occurring between 2009 and 2013 were on collector or local roads. So that was 4 over a 5-year period. And similarly for cycling, there were 0 cycling collisions that resulted in a fatality in that same 5-year period on collector or local roads. This here is just some representing the same information in Toronto East York versus citywide. Again, showing the share of collisions occurring on varying road classifications. So major arterials, minor arterials, collectors, locals, expressways, and laneways. And on the left side, it's the pedestrian collisions. On the right side, it's the cycling collisions. The punchline here is that, as you can see, what's occurring in terms of the share on road classification in Toronto East York does not vary significantly from the rest of the city. Okay, this graph shows pedestrian collisions in Toronto East York Community Council as a share of citywide by road classifications. And again, if you could envision that roughly a quarter of the population were equally distributed in the 4 regions, that you would expect to see about 25% of the pedestrian collisions occurring in each of the classifications. Now, the share of roadway classification types around the city is not necessarily equal as well, so you will see a greater kilometerage of major arterial roadways in the North York, Scarborough, and Etobicoke areas. As you can see, though, the disproportionate share of cycling collisions are occurring in Toronto East York, and again, this relates to the mode split and the level of cyclings that we see in the downtown core. One piece that whenever we show lots of statistics like this, it's very difficult to sort of capture it in a fair way. This is the one piece that we'll get these printed and emailed around for folks to see, but what we didn't do in the report is normalize on a per kilometer basis the level of collisions that were occurring by road classification on a kilometer basis. So, and the point of this was that at one point someone had mentioned that, well, look at the number of collisions that occurred on 30-kilometer-per-hour roadways. They're much less than 40-kilometer roadways. Well, yes, that was true, but it's also true that the proportion of 40-kilometer local roadways to 30-kilometer local roadways is roughly 10-to-1. So what we're trying to do here is simply show the collision levels by kilometerage for Toronto East York as well. This here looks at fatality rates and injury rates per kilometer. So this would be pedestrian fatality injury rates by road class over 5 years. And again, highlighting here is that by far the smallest share is occurring on local roads. So in summary, I think in our report what we've identified is that lower speeds may bring safety improvements, but should be considered, or lower speeds will bring safety improvements, but should be considered in conjunction and be reflective of the roadway environment. Our concern here is that artificially lowering speed limits alone may not achieve the result desired by the community and still support the use of the 30-kilometer-per-hour policy as the litmus test for when and where we would apply this. The benefits that we see coming out of this, again, we acknowledge that traffic collisions at lower speeds do result in less injuries and less fatalities. But again, I think the one thing we're struggling with here is whether or not this actually would achieve that. So again, improved safety for pedestrians and cyclists. The severity of injuries and fatalities may be reduced. Obviously, lower speed limits, if we can get compliance, would improve visibility for motorists and permit them to see and stop in a shorter distance. The one positive would be is that providing consistent posted speed limits on local roads would probably be helpful. We do have a mix within Toronto East York of roads where they vary often segment to segment between 30 kilometers per hour, 40 kilometers per hour, and 50 kilometers per hour. And lower speed limit may actually improve the uniformity of traffic flow, bringing drivers into a closer speed differential among vehicles. Again, creating a better environment for folks is obviously a positive to the extent that we can encourage more walking and cycling. And it could result in a reduction in both fuel. It could result in a reduction in both fuel consumption and pollutant emissions by motor vehicles on the assumption that motors comply with posted speed limits. So, and then finally, noise reduction has been associated with lower speeds as well. So. The limitations that we see, obviously cost here is when we look at cost within government, we want to consider what are the other things we could be spending this on. Again, concerns about artificially setting 30 kilometers per hour may not be suitable for many local roads. No consideration is being given to the physical configuration of the roadway and how the road is being used. Lower speed limits may result in speed differentials between vehicles. Residents may not be supportive of widespread reduction in speed limits. Again, you're the elected officials here, so you can weigh in on what you're hearing from your local constituencies. We will need to modify signal timings, which isn't a large deal, but to ensure proper intersection clearance time. Streets may require sustained visible enforcement to ensure compliance. And again, anything we do here should be coupled with an appropriate public awareness and education campaign to ensure that motorists understand that area-wide speed limit reductions are in place. So, on the implementation considerations, currently in Toronto East York, there is roughly 1,100 kilometers of roadway in total. Roughly 152 of those kilometers have already been set at 30 kilometers per hour. Roughly 387 kilometers of road would need to be re-signed from 40. And also there is, and perhaps this was an oversight early on, is that there is still a substantial kilometerage of local roads that are posted at 50 kilometers per hour. So it's 113, roughly 113 kilometers. So from a budgetary standpoint, again, based on the concept of taking 387 kilometers to a new signage at 40, from 40 to 30, We estimate that roughly 4,500 signs would be required at roughly $225 per sign. This is how we derive the cost. We also have to modify signal retimings, and then the installation time frame would take approximately 515 crew days to complete. So again, that can be structured in a way that would reduce the window should we use multiple crews. So, and I'll conclude with that.
Great, thank you. As I mentioned before, what happened there? Oh, just the unplugging of the cord. So we'll move on. We do have a representative from Toronto Public Health, Monica Campbell. Do you have a presentation prepared on the report?
No, I do not.
No. So what we'll do, with the permission of committee, is we'll just have a round of questions to the author of the public health. We'll do the deputations first. Yes. Yeah.
Chair, I'm just
Yes,
interested.
Councillor.
Mr. Buckley had said he's able to get us that report. So he's going to send it to the clerk, who's going to copy that for us.
And the clerk can distribute it.
Now, pardon?
The presentation.
I
The
plugged it.
presentation.
I don't want the TEYCC report, but it's customary to usually have the printed report.
We will have the presentation circulated.
Presentation.
So let's move on to deputants. The first deputant is Liz Sutherland. Liz, you're going to have 5 minutes. The time is going to be on my right.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Good evening, council members. I'm Liz Sutherland, and I'm a ward volunteer with Cycle Toronto Ward 18. As for my own experience, I've lived on Brock Avenue, which is a residential street, and I live on Edwin Avenue now in Ward 18. And I've seen my fair share of near misses and collisions, and certainly all kinds of speeding happening on our residential streets now. Ward 18 has almost as many traffic management committees as we have resident associations because of the drivers that spill out onto residential streets because of the congestion we have on our arterial roads. Just 3 weeks ago, my partner was hit on his bike by an SUV driver that was cutting up Euclid to avoid the traffic on Bathurst. He's fine now. He had more than a week off work, which came with its own costs. But I would just like to point out that just because we don't have that many deaths among cyclists and pedestrians on residential streets, that doesn't mean that there aren't costs associated with speeding on those streets. And that had an impact on my family very recently. I wanted to say that I fully support this motion. I know there are other initiatives to try and reduce speed limits on a piece-by-piece basis in our city, and I think that that sets the threshold too high for residents to have to achieve a certain number of signatures or lobby their councillor for those kinds of improvements. I think that this is a more egalitarian approach, so not just those who are active in lobbying councillors or in getting their communities together can have the benefits of lower speed limits on their streets. So I think this universal approach that is being taken by the motion today is actually a very egalitarian and positive move. I also see it as a very good first step in a Vision Zero policy that I believe the City of Toronto should take on. Speed reductions are one very good way to improve and ultimately eliminate the number of deaths that we see among not only cyclists and pedestrians, but also drivers and passengers in our city. And we know that, for example, in 2013, Toronto saw 63 people die in traffic collisions, which was more than the number of homicides that year. So if we're having problems with enforcement with a lower speed limit, perhaps we need to dedicate more police resources to traffic violence rather than homicides if we actually have more deaths on that side. So that's how I would suggest addressing the issues that Mr. Buckley brought up in terms of driver non-compliance with the new speed limits. I wanted to say 2 more things. My group, Cycle Toronto Ward 18, got together about a year ago with our counterparts in Ward 14 and 13 and a local community group called Dig In, which also is based in Ward 18. The initiative is called the Street Safety Project, and it came out of a conversation between cyclists and an e-bike rider and driver who were incredibly frustrated with the lack of respect and civility and conscientiousness among road users in our city. And we felt very disempowered at the local level as to what we could do about this. And so we decided to start this initiative to bring people together. We drew in our 11 Division Police, Community Police Liaison Committee, which gave us a little pot of money for us to start up a website and develop some outreach materials. We just got our buttons made up this week, so I can give you those if you'd like. But it was a way to empower community members to do something about the state of traffic on our streets. And so I think that's one example of what people can do on a grassroots level to address our state of traffic violence, but also I think this lower speed limit policy would go a long way to supporting that kind of work as well. The last thing I want to say has to do with the goal of 0 deaths in the Vision Zero policy that I hope this policy will be one step towards. Vision Zero Nevada actually made a really great video recently called What's Your Goal? And they go around and they ask people, what should be the goal of a traffic safety initiative in your city? How many deaths do you think is an acceptable level? And people said things like, oh, I don't know, maybe 10, maybe 100. I really have no idea. And then they asked people, what's a suitable goal for your family? How many deaths is acceptable in your family? And everyone said, none, of course. Why, of course, it has to be 0 in my family. And so for those of you who don't know about the Vision Zero initiative, I would say that that is not an arbitrary target. It is the only acceptable policy and only acceptable goal for a city that actually wants to achieve traffic safety. So I applaud you today for considering this motion on reducing speed limits universally on our residential streets. I would call it a first step, but perhaps it will provide momentum to this city to actually adopt a comprehensive and rapidly implemented Vision Zero policy. So thank you very much for listening to me today.
Just to remind folks, if it's your first time here, and I know it is not for many of you, if you could please, we refrain from the applause. You can get a little handshake or something like that. Are there any questions of the deputant? Yes, Councillor Fletcher. Ms. Sutherland, if you could join us again just up here. You've got some questions.
Pardon me.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much for coming. I just wondered, the policy that exists, or the direction that the city staff are interested in us taking, is that you would have to petition for 30 kilometers for your street, and the onus then goes on the neighbors or the residents to achieve a 30-kilometer. Do you, and I don't think you agree with that.
Correct.
Think that it's better if we declare 30 kilometers? And would you think the city really should then support, rather than having to do all that work to get 30, if people wanted to opt out from 30, that would be less work and not as expensive as we're hearing to get to 30?
Less work and not expensive, not as expensive. I imagine that I can't speak to the cost. I'm not sure about that, but I think it would be less work to have it that way. I don't think you'll find many people seeking to opt out of a 30-kilometer-an-hour limit when it comes to their own street, right? Because they're worried about their own families and neighbors and so on. So yeah, I imagine that it would be less costly, and I certainly think that it would be less difficult to implement if you had an opt-out provision.
And that it really is up to the city to take the initiative to keep the streets safe. It shouldn't be up to your street or my street or Councillor Street or anybody's actual street to take an initiative to make a safer street.
I believe that's correct. I mean, you will have seen the Toronto Public Health reports that came out in the last year about the number of collisions, the number of injuries, number of deaths. And this is a public health issue before anything else. And we don't leave public health decisions, for the most part, to individuals when they concern all of us as a collective.
And I see that the collision data in here doesn't go into, in our report that we have in front of us, doesn't go into the costs that you referred to for your partner, which is the week off work, the healing, and all the rest of it. As far as a collision is concerned, it's not a fatality, but it's a major life event to have a collision on a street. And it was on your local street or your neighborhood street.
That's correct. I think those costs are often overlooked. The personal costs and the costs that accrue to individuals as opposed to the city. And I also think that the long-term benefits of having safe streets, which encourages more active transportation, the benefits in that case outweigh those costs. And those benefits are also often not calculated in these kinds of policies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions? No? We'll move on to our next speaker, William Brown.
His name is Crusader William Brown.
Crusader.
Bill Brown, in the house.
I'll start your time, Mr. Brown. It's on my right.
I beg your pardon, sir?
I will start your time. You'll have
understand.
5 minutes. It's to my
I
right.
should be less than that. Allow me to quote from a city document entitled Road Classification System. The road classification system and the resulting hierarchical road network will assist in developing a safe and effective transportation system to the satisfaction of a broad range of stakeholders, unquote. Simply stated, you would be hard-pressed to find a more vacuous statement. For a supposedly satisfied broad range of stakeholders, it has failed spectacularly to achieve a safe and effective transportation system. By your acceptance of this classification system, you too have failed. Your failure is that you have uncritically accepted a system that is designed for the exclusive use and convenience of the automobile. Other users of the public realm are not considered. You may rationalize this reality any way you wish, but you cannot ignore that one immutable fact. In seeking this reduced speed, you reveal a dreadful lack of concern for equity or equality. I say this because in your pursuit of what is clearly one social good, you have created two very different classes of residents in this city. One class of residents who live on streets classified as local have been chosen as being worthy of your support for a 30-kilometer-per-hour speed limit. The other class of residents who live on streets classified as arterial are being told their safety and their lives are expendable. Let me give you a personal example. Until the mid-1950s, my family home and nearby others, built almost 60 years earlier, were located on a residential street named Dagmar Avenue. Today, these same homes face onto Dundas Street East. In former Metro Toronto's zeal to promote car is king, a number of small, non-contiguous residential neighborhood streets between Broadview Avenue and Kingston Road were bulldozed and paved into a 4-lane suburban highway. Many front yards and some backyards were obliterated. Mature trees were destroyed, and the front doors of many of these family homes are now inches from the street. Since then, we have been arbitrarily deprived the full use and enjoyment of our homes. We must keep our doors and windows tightly shut against the noise, dirt, and pollution of the thousands of vehicles infiltrating our residential neighborhoods. Daily, we must endure this assault both inside and outside our homes. Not only that, our safety was and continues to be imperiled by motorists who consistently exceed a posted speed limit already too high on an easily identifiable residential street. Although it represents one of the most egregious acts of residential neighborhood destruction, it must be said that other residential neighborhoods have also been destroyed by the pro-automobile bias. If personal injuries and deaths are to be minimized or eliminated, this staff report unmistakably reveals a long overdue need to have reduced speeds on arterial streets. As the report confirms, 91% of all pedestrian deaths and 100% of all cyclist deaths have occurred on arterials. Yes, these streets must be redesigned to ensure compliance with a reduced speed limit. As part of a densely populated residential community, Dundas Street East is a perfect candidate for this needed change. Having said that, this community council now has a choice. If you confine yourselves to the simplistic view of streets classified as local, you are in effect telling the many residents who live along these designated arterials that we are unimportant. Our safety and our lives are disposable. We are to be sacrificed on the altar of automobile primacy. Conversely, look beyond the curb. Do not perpetuate the mistakes of the last century. Do not be misled by this contrived classification system. Expand your vision beyond the Transportation Department's myopic curb-to-curb vision. If the safety of all residents is your goal, you must include these streets, residential in zoning, residential in fact, regardless of that pernicious, anachronistic, and misbegotten artificial road classification system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've got some questions. The first one from Councillor Perks.
Thanks. Bill, it's good to see you again. It's been a few years.
I'm going to have to speak up word. I'm getting deaf in my old age.
Oh, dear. It's from all those years of shouting at politicians. Bill, you know that at the community council, we can only do local roads.
No, I do understand that.
Right.
Dundas is a minor, and that's within your purview. But it's still,
With one exception, if there's a TTC route, we're not allowed to do it
there's
here.
no TTC route. The TTC doesn't want to put bus on our street.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
why
That's
the
good to know.
streetcars, if you notice the tracks at Broadview, they go north and south. That's
Okay.
because Dundas didn't exist.
That's helpful to
Time
know,
to
thank
put
you.
in.
But would you agree that we should do the streets we can do here and try to get the rest of them through the main city council?
It's called a paradigm shift, Gord.
I'm with you there, brother. And listen, is my memory right? Is the first time you and I made a deputation about slowing down speeds on city streets 1991 in this very building?
It's quite possible.
I think that's
I know
when we did it.
We tried to get the speeds lowered on Dundas because it was 50K initially, and it was Jack Layton who finally got us the 40.
There you go. Thank you,
So
Bill.
that made a bit of an improvement, and the bike lanes were also put in because of Jack. And initially, traffic was slower, cars that is, because pedestrians are traffic too. But what's happening now is 40 is the minimum to these drivers, not the maximum. So this is why I'm going after design change,
Thank you.
because there's a lot of room for it.
Are there any more questions of the deputant? No? Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for listening.
Dylan Reed? Dylan, you'll have 5 minutes. The time's to my right.
Thank you very much. My name is, the time is starting at 1:40.
Oh, sorry, it's reset behind you, so it's at the right time behind you. Sometimes one
Okay,
clock is off
Okay, great.
than the other. Gotcha.
Fabulous. Hi, my name is Dylan Reed. I'm speaking on behalf of Walk Toronto and the Toronto Centre for Active Transportation. Walk Toronto is a grassroots volunteer advocacy group dedicated to making Toronto a better city for walking. The Toronto Centre for Active Transportation works to advance knowledge and evidence to build support for safe and inclusive streets and walking and cycling. Walk Toronto and the Toronto Centre for Active Transportation strongly support the proposed speed limit, reduction of speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour on local streets in Toronto and East York. The safety benefits of speed reductions are well known to the Community Council, so we will focus on addressing some of the arguments that are often made against universal speed limit reduction proposals such as this one. It's sometimes argued that speed limit changes are ineffective without changes to the road infrastructure itself. However, a recent study by University of Missouri researchers in the town of Columbia, Missouri, showed that on residential streets, simply posting a lower speed limit does in fact reduce speeds. After an area-wide 5 mile per hour reduction in posted speeds, vehicle speeds in the areas where the reduction was made were reduced from between 1 mile per hour to over 6 miles per hour, that's 10 kilometers an hour, on the roads that were studied. And as a result of the study, the city went ahead and reduced speeds across the entire city on residential roads. Universal speed limit changes appear to work because drivers internalize a new speed limit. It becomes a new normal on that kind of street. Another benefit is that speed limits become consistent for the type of street with the new limit, rather than the current confusing situation in Toronto where speed limits vary from street to street or even among the same streets, depending on whether local traffic calming measures have been implemented already. While the proposed measure only affects part of the overall city of Toronto, it is a large and distinctive enough part of the city that drivers can internalize the idea that when they are in the older parts of Toronto, they should drive more slowly on local streets. An awareness campaign would make this effect even stronger. I should add that, of course, this doesn't preclude expanding this speed limit reduction to other parts of the city where people want, or to arterial roads, which, as we know, the province is looking into. I feel that this would be a start, though. This would be a very valuable beginning. Toronto and East York also has an advantage, though, in that street infrastructure already does encourage slower speeds to some extent. While the City of Toronto recently established criteria for reducing speed limits without speed bumps, these criteria are overly restrictive. In fact, many local streets in Toronto and East York are already only 7.3 meters wide. Some are narrower. With 2 meters of parking in a two-way street, that leaves very little room for cars to pass. Where streets are one-way, they're often characterized by four-way stops and discontinuities. So these are often streets that don't encourage speeding as is, but it makes a lot of sense to actually reduce that speed where possible. Where local streets are wider or otherwise continue to be subject to speeding, it would make sense to continue the current policy of providing traffic calming measures where needed, Slower speed limits will in fact help highlight which streets are most in need of such additional measures. It's also sometimes argued, it's been argued in the staff report that only a small percentage of collisions happen on local streets. However, if you look at the staff report, it admits that almost no pedestrian collisions causing injury happen on streets with 30-kilometer-per-hour speed limits, less than 1% of the total. By comparison, 15.6% of all collisions in Toronto East York causing injury happen on local streets with 40 kilometers an hour limits. Now, I know Steve talked this, but using, I think these are his numbers, there's 152 kilometers currently signed at 30 kilometers an hour, and 387 currently signed at local streets currently signed at 40 kilometers an hour. So that's about 2.5 times as many, but there's 17 times as many collisions on 40 kilometer hour local streets as on 30 kilometer hour local streets. So, you know, the difference is really significant, and I think the 30 kilometers an hour shows really make a difference. And the potential is, if speeds were reduced, potential of perhaps 400 fewer pedestrians injured in collisions over 5 years, and of course that benefit will just continue as the years go by. But it's not just about deaths and injuries. Reducing speeds on local roads also helps to create a feeling of safety on the street when it encourages people to walk in their neighborhood. It makes parents more confident allowing their children to walk to school or the park. It helps seniors feel more confident venturing out to a stroll. As people spend more time on the street and see their neighbors there, their sense of well-being and community increases. So reducing speed limits will encourage walking with all the health and community benefits that come with it. And I also wanted to add my support to the idea mentioned by a previous applicant about equity. It's really important that basically all streets are changed, not just streets where the local community is well organized and has the resources to push through these changes. I think it's really beneficial to change them on all streets equally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? Councillor Fletcher.
I just wanted to go over that last point. Thank you very much for coming. About the equity and that the way that the policy is written and is being presented is that it should be street by street and people should organize in order to change the speed limit. And your point is that you feel that's inequitable because it means you have to be able to organize, and streets where maybe there's a lot of second language speakers might not get out and be able to do that. Just elaborate a little bit on why it's important that everybody gets treated the same.
Yeah, well, I think basically everyone deserves the same degree of safety. And I think at the moment, all of you probably are familiar with which streets have traffic calming measures at the moment. They're probably streets with single-family homes, owner-occupied, possibly quite well off. And I think it's really important that basically every street in Toronto get the same thing, even if it's renters who may be more transient, or like you said, people who may have English as a second language and don't organize as easily, you know. So I think it's really important to make that change everywhere, and as opposed to a piecemeal thing that really only benefits those who are, you know, well organized enough to actually make the difference. And I think also the other thing, of course, is that. In the future, I think the next step will be to look at arterial roads because, of course, a lot of people on arterial roads, you know, it's the same thing. They need speed reductions as well, but we need to start somewhere, and I think this is the place to start.
So the notion that it's the onus is on the residents, you think the onus should be on the city?
Exactly.
To make streets as safe as possible.
Absolutely, yeah.
To have a
And to take those measures for all citizens, not just the citizens who shout the loudest.
And I did read that in the report as well with the collision rate. Once you're at 30 is just negligible.
It really is.
Local roads with 40.
Yeah.
So that would speak very strongly to simply reduce that
Exactly.
to 30.
Yes, agreed.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've now got a list of questions. Councillor Davis, Councillor McMahon.
So are you aware of how we sign the default speed limit in the City of Toronto?
You mean for, yeah, I mean, well, the default's 50 kilometers an hour, I believe, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Are you aware of how we sign that?
No, or I'm not sure.
Do you see signs for 50 everywhere on every street?
No.
No. Okay,
You do see them.
thank you.
Councillor McMahon.
Sure. Thank you very much for coming down and for all you do at Walk TO. So can you just run that by me again? You were talking about when you sign a street 30 kilometers, just with basic signage, you have some studies that speed limits are reduced by
Yeah,
one or
there was a study out of Columbia, Missouri, and it was actually based on an earlier study from another town as well that showed that simply changing the signs does actually reduce the actual speeds. Not always consistently, but there is a general speed reduction. Sometimes the speed reduction is the full amount that's been reduced.
And do we have that study with your submission or that link to that, or?
I tried to, but the PDF kind of killed the link.
Oh, okay.
I
So-
could distribute it if
Okay,
desired.
that'd be great. I think all the councils would like that. Thanks.
Okay.
She asked my question.
She asked the question.
Councillor McMahon wisely asked a very good question.
Wonderful.
Mine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Suhal Barrett. Suhal. Hello there.
Hello,
I'll start the clock on my right, and you'll have 5 minutes.
thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Suhail Barod. I'm a resident actually of Ward 15, though I go to the University of Toronto, which is in Ward 20, and I spend probably 90% of my waking hours in Old Toronto. I'm here, so I wear lots of hats, though I'm a cyclist, I'm a walker. I even took a taxi cab 2 weeks ago, which did not follow any of the speed limits posted in the city of Toronto. But I'm alive. And in this context, I'm here to speak in favor of the speed reductions that are posted. I went to school before coming to Toronto at the University of Illinois, and they had over the what was referred to as the University District, which was an area perhaps 10 to 20 square kilometers in size, where there were blanket speed reductions in place in order to protect pedestrians and cyclists, because virtually everybody at the university walked or cycled relative to driving. And it was an effective policy because you knew that when you entered this portion of the city, speed limits were going to be lower, and this was something that you as a driver needed to be on the lookout for. And while I was at the University of Illinois, while we unfortunately did not have a perfect record of avoiding all deaths for pedestrians and cyclists, it was certainly much safer to be a pedestrian or cyclist in the University District than it was to be in other parts of the city. This is something that is important. It is dangerous, frankly, to be a cyclist or a pedestrian in this city, as we are all aware of from the events of the past 3 weeks. I personally have been hit by a car on Davenport Road last year. It was not a pleasant experience, and it was somebody coming up from a side street who was coming too fast, saw a stop sign and thought they might be able to get away with the turn, and then saw me and braked. And while they did stop, which is a good thing, if they had not been going as fast as they initially were on a side street, they would have been able to stop earlier, and I might not have been hit by a car. This is even while I agree with the opinions expressed earlier that we need these speed reductions on arterials just as badly. We do need them on our side streets. We need to be able to get past the point where after traveling for half an hour in the city, I don't need to pick up the phone and call someone and say, I arrived safely. This needs to not be a thing where you need to report in to say, I was not hit by any cars after traveling in Toronto today. It is broadly unacceptable that anyone should be in danger while they are on the public right-of-way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No? Thank you. Albert Cole. Oh, he is. Hi there, Albert. You'll have 5 minutes. I'm going to reset the clock to my right.
Hey, thanks very much. My name's Albert Cole. A few years ago, I served on the expert panel for Ontario's chief coroner on his review of pedestrian deaths. And one of his key recommendations was, in fact, lowering speed limits to reduce the number of people being killed. Today, I'm here as vice chair of the Annex Residents Association. It's been our policy since 2011 to get lower speed limits, 30-kilometer speed limits on area roads. We held a public consultation where there was overwhelming support for lower speed limits. The recent push for lower speed limits has gained traction in many parts of the world for an obvious reason, is that when we think of our own parents or our spouse or our children, we want the car that is going beside them or near them to be going slower rather than more quickly. More and more people are rejecting the traditional notion that death is an acceptable cost of our transport system. This rejection entails lower speed limits. So attempts to lower speed limits actually date to the 1920s when cars first became common. And one of the reasons for that is that people were outraged by the number of children that were being killed by cars. And there was a movement, in fact, to get speed governors on cars to slow them down. But of course, the auto lobby was very strong, and today, even in Toronto Star, I was reading about an article about a car that was described, a new car described as deceptively quick, 340 horsepower, 330 pound per foot torque, and 0 to 100 in 6.4 seconds. So the obvious question is, what parent wants to share, have their kids share that road with that car? That's a question we haven't asked for a long time. And now we're starting to ask that question, and that's why we're getting resistance. So what's changed today? Well, for starters, we have the evidence of clear science of the benefits of lower speeds, and we also have 300,000 deaths since 1920 on our roads involving motor vehicles. So I think we're also a bit more savvy about rejecting some of the excuses that we often hear touted, excuses that aren't supported by science. So the science today makes us a bit more confident about talking about 30-kilometer speed limits. I mean, that, the figures that we've heard about the lower chances of being killed are pretty dramatic. I think we're also less cowed by this slogan of war on the car that we often hear when we try to propose anything that will make our roads safer. When my toaster breaks, I don't wave my fist at the toaster and declare war on the toaster. I try to get my toaster fixed, and that's in fact what we're trying to do today. One of the things that tells us that our transport system isn't working very well is in fact the number of deaths that we have on our roads, along with things like climate change, air pollution, noise, cost, and so on. I think it's really important, this motion that you're discussing to lower speed limits, for a couple of obvious reasons that some of them have been mentioned today. I think it sends a clear message to other parts of the city as well. Parts of the city like Finch, for example, and the number of deaths on Finch is simply outrageous, and I hope the councillors for Finch are listening to this as well. I grew up in Windsor, Ontario, on an arterial road. Despite the fact that it was arterial, I still had to cross the street to go to school. I still had to deliver my papers. I still had to visit friends. I still had to go shopping. And so the fact that we call these roads arterial, especially Finch, take a look at Finch. I mean, there are all kinds of people that live along Finch. For those people, it's not an arterial road. It's a residential road where their kids walk. And unfortunately, those roads are very dangerous. A neighbor of mine in Windsor along that very road, he was killed. He was a grade younger than me at grade school, was killed when he was delivering the newspapers. So the second thing why it's very important to take this action today is that it also opens the door for smaller, lower-powered cars. Remember, 10 years ago, we started talking about Zen cars and lower-powered vehicles, zero-emission vehicles. I think instead of talking about this 340-horsepower vehicle, we can talk about lower-powered cars that will be more suitable for urban environments. And finally, I reject the idea of doing these speed reductions in conjunction with traffic calming. That will take many decades, will slow things down, and the question is, how many people will die unnecessarily, avoidably during that time? So finally, I'd say lowering speed limits is all about increasing the margin of error so that a small mistake, a senior losing their balance on the sidewalk or a child distracted by a bird, doesn't become fatal. Errors in judgment should not be punished with a death sentence. So lower speed limits increase the margin of error, and ultimately we live or die in that margin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cole. You've got a couple questions. Councillor Cressy, then Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Albert. Just a couple of very brief questions. So you said you're here today on behalf of the Annex Residents Association.
Yes.
And you hosted a public consultation on this?
Yes.
And what was the feedback at that consultation from residents?
Well, we asked people at that meeting, there were about 70 people. We publicized that widely, and there was one of several safety features that we discussed, one of them being 30-kilometer speed limits. And I can tell you there was overwhelming support for 30-kilometer speed limits in our neighborhood, that being the Annex.
And the Annex Residents Association has endorsed this, I take it?
We're in support.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, earlier just when you started, thank you for coming, you'd mentioned that you had worked for the coroner. Could you just tell me that again? I missed that part.
Yeah, in 2011, a colleague of mine and I, Patrick Brown, we went to the coroner on behalf of United Senior Citizens and a number of other community groups and asked the coroner specifically to do a review of pedestrian and cycling deaths. The last review of cycling deaths had been in 1998, and there was a flurry of deaths in the preceding year to our request. So we represented those groups, and then were asked to sit on on the coroner's expert committee.
And which then determined, I think you'd mentioned, the coroner's expert committee determined that 30 for a residential street is a good, is the speed that we should be working?
Well, the top recommendation, yes, was for complete streets. So a suite of recommendations, but one of them was certainly lower speed limits and lower default speed limits, including 30 kilometers in residential areas.
So that would basically be the default on a residential should be 30, and that's
Yes.
what the annex supports. Of course, you know that the default, unless posted somewhere, is 50 in the city of Toronto. And so that report from the coroner, where is that available? Because I don't see it mentioned anywhere in this report.
I can, number one, send it to you, but I can also tell you it's simply on the coroner's site. If you Google coroner's pedestrian death review or coroner's cycling death review, you'll find it there.
And that's the coroner for the Ontario province?
Ontario's chief coroner, correct.
All right. I appreciate it when you say the small mistake, but even if we can stop a small mistake, that would be very good. I'm just wondering about other traffic calming measures. If you think there should be other traffic calming measures that the city would be proactive about, if your residents association has thought about that in any way, outside of reduction of speed limits.
Yeah. Well, my concern about traffic calming is that it's generally associated with a significant cost. I mean, the reason I think the lower speed limit, it doesn't have to be police enforced. I think giving the community the moral authority to enforce that. I know in our neighborhoods, people are very vigilant on their streets. I'm one of the people that will wave my arms at someone who's going even say 50 in an area where there are children. But I think the moral authority you get by being able to say this is 30 and waving your hand or your fist or whatever the case might be at that driver, I think that has a real power. And I think the other thing, obvious things, for example, that we need to be looking at are a cycling network. That's an obvious one. Ontario roads, more mid-block crossings, which was one of the coroner's recommendations. So I think those things are really important. But the speed limit reduction sends a clear message, is a part of a cultural shift, and is very, very important.
Yes, and you note in this report that it apparently is extremely expensive. Do you think $225 a sign seems a bit high?
I can't comment on that. If it saves a life, that's well spent, for
No,
sure.
I meant the cost of that, but the $1 million that we would spend for all of the old city of Toronto and East York to change all of the signs, you think that would be money well spent then?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I had Councillor Davis and then Councillor Mihevc.
Did the coroner's report have any comments about police enforcement?
There were various elements of that, and I can't remember specifically in terms of police report enforcement. There were definitely recommendations around better driver training, also better cyclist and pedestrian education, but specifically around police enforcement, I don't recall what the recommendation was.
Okay, maybe I'll ask staff if we have any information either about police enforcement.
Councillor Mihevc.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Previous deputy mentioned, and I'm guessing that you probably agree, that lowering the speed in and of itself without doing other things has an effect, but perhaps not as big an effect as we would like. Did the coroner, from your knowledge, what other things need to happen to actually get that speed lowered?
Well, I don't know if the coroner went into additional details around that. I mean, they definitely talked about provincial action and municipal action, but in terms of other things to get drivers to respect the speed limit, I don't recall if there are any other
Anything
specific
around narrowing of the roads or at intersections, stuff like that?
I'd have to take a look back at that, but I know there were certainly recommendations around road design, and the whole idea of a complete streets is to make a street safely shared by the various different road users. And specifically, as been mentioned, the coroner talked about a paradigm shift that we've heard here as well this afternoon.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? No? Eric Dunbar.
Thank you very much. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So rarely does an opportunity present itself where we can save people's lives and we can improve the quality of our own communities. And all for the simple cost of $1.1 million, which will be amortized over at least a decade, if not longer. So if I use the city's own numbers, I can predict that we could have saved 12 pedestrian lives over the last 4 years. So that's 12 lives. And then tack on the cyclists, we have an additional 4 cyclists that would be alive today had we reduced speed limits 4 years ago from 40 kilometers to 30 and from 50 kilometers to 40 and made sure that the traffic also flowed accordingly. So that's 16 lives. That's not an insignificant number. So the other advantage to having lower speed limits, we're familiar with the severity of injuries. Obviously, we have less severe injuries that survivors experience. So for the 44 deaths that we saw on the roads in the last 4 years, there are thousands of people who got hit, ended up in hospital, ended up paraplegic, requiring support for the rest of their lives. Now, if you take a very conservative estimate of $5 million for life in a wrongful death suit, you could argue that the city is morally on the hook for $80 million in damages for the past 4 years. So if we look at simple tort law, $80 million for 4 years versus a $1 million investment, which will be amortized over at least a decade, and then continues paying benefits far into the future, that's a pretty safe investment. The other thing is, streets are regularly rebuilt. I look at my own street, Eaton Ave, and it's obvious that it's going to need some TLC within the next decade. And a street like that is a perfect place for either a narrowing, a boulevard, speed bumps, what have you. So when the time comes to resurface the street, we can also have those measures installed. And if there is a speed limit on that street, on my street, for example, of 30 kilometers an hour, then we have the moral suasion to go to council and ask that the street be properly engineered to support safe travel speeds on my particular street. Now, obviously, I'm concerned about my own street, but the reality is there are, 2.5 million Torontonians. I imagine probably 1.5 million of Toronto lives within the boundaries of the area affected by this, maybe 1 million. So 40% of Toronto, so I guess 1 million. So about 1 million people that would be affected by a blanket speed reduction. That's a pretty substantial number of people. So, as it is, a sizable chunk of the drivers around my area, East York, they already drive below the posted speed limit. They either do that voluntarily, so on my own street, I regularly see people, I'd say about half of the people drive 30 kilometers or less already on a street that is posted as 40. Or they're forced to because traffic simply doesn't allow it. Traffic volume is so high that you don't have the luxury of driving the speed limit. The problem is, once the opportunity to drive the speed limit opens up, people suddenly accelerate very rapidly. So if travel speed is 25 kilometers an hour, and then all of a sudden there's a break and the speed limit is 50 on the Danforth, then all of a sudden people are accelerating very rapidly and then slamming on the brakes when they hit the next stoplight, creating dangerous driving conditions. So, I've already mentioned that if we had speed limits that were at least 10 kilometers lower than they are, we have the legal imperative to ask police to intervene. Or, no, sorry, that's new. So we have the legal imperative to ask police to intervene. So even if it doesn't necessarily result in an immediate speed drop, at least we can ask the police to do something about it. Okay, so I'm going to finish off by thanking you for listening to my deputation. And it still amazes me, truly amazes me, that we could have prevented the unnecessary deaths of 16 people over the past 4 years with a very simple measure of a speed reduction from 50 to 40 and 40 to 30 and enforcing it. Thank you.
Right on 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No? Thank you, sir. Robert TEYCC. Hi there, Robert. I'm going to start the time. You got 5 minutes. The clock's on my right.
Thank you, Councillor Layton. Good evening, members of the Toronto East York Community Council. On behalf of the Cycle Toronto Ward 14 Advocacy Group, I would like to express our support for reducing speed limits on all local roads in the Toronto East York District to 30 kilometers per hour. In light of recent cycling and pedestrian deaths, one of which prompted me to attend my first ever ghost ride this past Saturday, the need for action has become more urgent than ever given lower speed limits lead to fewer fatalities. While this motion is a good first step, more needs to be done in order to achieve Vision Zero. As someone who bikes and drives, I recognize the reality drivers will drive according to what the road design allows them to. Case in point, the CNE grounds. While the posted speed limit is 30 kilometers per hour, the streets are designed with the Honda Indy in mind, and if you put hidden cameras without enforcement, I'll guarantee you'll see drivers go along those streets at least 50 kilometers an hour. Forcing drivers to slow down requires implementing traffic calming measures such as parked cars, sometimes on alternating sides, speed bumps, bump outs, and contraflow bike lanes. An example of a street that works well in Ward 14 is Springhurst Avenue. At 7.2 meters wide, this narrow street has parking on one side, which means two-way traffic does not have much room to go through. And thanks to the recent 1 meter passing rule passed by Queen's Park, cyclists are encouraged to take the lane, which helps reduce traffic speeds even further. When you factor in speed bumps on Springhurst Avenue, you'll get the picture that driving more than 30 kilometers per hour on Springhurst is just nuts. To ensure compliance of reduced speed limits, perhaps the Community Council could instruct city staff to investigate the feasibility of incorporating traffic calming measures when local roads are due for reconstruction. While this would not rule out earlier implementation, it would help minimize the cost of having to do it over again, right? Before I wrap up, I'd like to discuss two other traffic calming measures which are not that well used here, but I feel the Toronto could benefit. The first of which is traffic diversion. This is pretty common in Ottawa and Vancouver, where drivers will not be able to go straight and have to divert to another street. but cyclists and pedestrians, they can continue to go straight. Another one that is good that's used in the Netherlands is unmarked contraflow lanes. And this is something Councillor Bailao and the cycling unit brought up when discussing the completion of the Argyle-Florence contraflow lane project. Achieving Vision Zero also requires certain actions that are out of scope of this motion, but they will still need to be considered. These include building the minimum grid of protected bike lanes and bicycle boulevards, reducing the speed limits on Ontario roads to 40 kilometers per hour, and getting Scarborough, Etobicoke, and North York to also implement the 30 zones in their districts. I thank you for your time, and I urge you to pass this motion.
Thank you very much. Robert, are there any questions of the deputant? No? Thank you. Kane?
Knickel.
Kane Niegel?
Right, it's Knickel.
Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm taller than I thought. Hi, my name's Kane Knickel. I'm a resident of East York. I'm just a girl with an opinion. I need to say that I do not support changing of the proposed speed limit because I believe that people who speed will do so no matter what the speed limit is. I firmly believe that what is needed is that everyone, pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers, must behave responsibly, carefully, and adhere to the rules and laws of the roads. We live in a society where so many people act with an entitlement and impatience. I'm not at all implying that speeding is not an issue, as I frequently see both vehicles and buses speed through both our main arterial road, but in our residential streets as well. On our neighborhood streets, I often see people of all ages, and even with babies and toddlers in tow, darting through live traffic, even though the stoplights are a mere few meters away. Most frequently, I witness vehicles passing, turning vehicles, and stop buses, all too often precariously passing street openings. Also common are vehicles turning out into street, cutting off oncoming vehicles that are within a meter or two away from them. I see cyclists and scooters who do not adhere to traffic lights or stop signs, and during the evening, more often do not have any lights on their vehicles. More must be done to ensure safety for all by both the city and individuals. We must be accountable for our actions. Simply reducing the speed limit does not address this. Constant and consistent enforcement of the Highway and Traffic Act and to discourage illegal, dangerous, and reckless acts that may be potentially fatal. Further, I also believe that in addition to this, the city must revisit and enforce current parking bylaws to accommodate the heavier traffic flow during peak periods of traffic flow of the working and the schooling community. Members and not by the current way of things, by complaint or incident and then action and brief safety blitz following. There are other steps that I believe that could be taken in controlling or dissuading people from speeding. Make more one-way streets to alter the traffic flow, more north-south only streets, resetting bus stops to match with traffic lights, not at street corners or at hidden intersections. At some streets, no left turn, for example, at the south side of Lumsden at Cedardale. No parking anywhere on single-lane arterial streets, i.e. Lumsden and Mortimer Avenues. And lastly, as we have parking enforcement, consider creating a speed enforcement authority for the City of Toronto. That's all.
Thank you very much. Questions?
I'm sorry, that last?
We're all friends here, not to worry. Councillor Perks.
I'm just a guy with an opinion.
Great.
That last comment you made about...
Isn't it neat?
It is neat.
Could
you go a little further with that, please?
Yeah.
Just
My thought of the parking enforcement is probably half-cocked because I don't understand what it involves. But I recall, probably from television, that the police used to handle parking tickets. Okay, so now we have what I call the pirates, the parking authority. So I imagine that the cameras are a very expensive proposition, and to put them in how many neighborhoods probably isn't feasible. But creating more employment and taking that away from the policemen and women so that they can do what they need to do with this rising violence that's occurring to take care of what's happening, speeding enforcement.
So are you suggesting that this nice gentleman over here, Mr. Buckley, get his own traffic speeding enforcement?
Here's the question. How do you know he's a nice man if he's speeding?
Thank you.
Councillor Matlow.
Hi.
Hi.
So, are you aware that sometimes in these debates, people who have different opinions sometimes create these either/or propositions?
Sure.
But are you aware that at City Council in May, I moved a motion that was strongly supported by Council to also ask the police to form a strategy to increase both visibility and a strategy for better enforcement to support our local neighborhoods?
I will tell you, no, I'm not aware of it, and I will tell you that contrary to one of your surveys, you said there was no mention of collision fatalities or injuries at 40 kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And I know within 5 years, we've had 2 deaths.
At 30 kilometers.
At 40 kilometers.
Yeah.
So just like I'm not aware of this, you weren't aware of that.
Oh, that's fair,
What
yeah.
do you want to say? Because the policemen still aren't in our neighborhoods unless they're looking for violence that is occurring, not speeding, et cetera.
No, the only reason I phrased it as a question is because that's the only way that I can make the comment to you, admittedly. But I really just...
Did you want my phone number?
I would love to have a conversation with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Are we finished?
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Kane,
Now
for
you found out
coming.
what I was going to say.
Yes. We have attempted many strategies for Mortimer and Lumsden.
Yeah, we have the lights now.
We've got a number of lights. I wanted to get a better understanding of your recommendation. One was to improve enforcement, and that I fully agree, and I think Councillor Matlow's asked for some reports to figure out how we would do that. But you talked about review of parking bylaws. So do you think there should be more parking or less parking, or what are you saying about parking?
What I'm trying to say is that I think that society has changed. Like, we've gone from one car to too many. We've gone from where we only need a snow road to now people are parking on the streets and causing impediments. Like I say, we're entitled and we are impatient. So having parking on the arterial road, people who are coming out from the local streets can't see, and being impatient, they're just dodging out. We're parking there for how long?
Right, from
Causing more
intersections.
Trouble.
Right. Okay, so you're concerned about sight lines around intersections?
No, I think I'm concerned, period.
And parking.
Period, because that past, what was good for the past isn't necessarily good for the future. So reviewing it means looking at it again and see where it's fine to be as it is, or do we need to improve it somehow? Do we need to change it?
And you made some other recommendation about Cedarville and Lumsden.
Yes. So coming out of Cedarville, you have either straight across the street or you have it coming to the curve. If you try doing that curve, because it's one way, it's a curve, you can't be seen and you cannot see oncoming traffic. That is terrifying.
Right.
So
Well,
imagine.
you know, we've studied and
No, I
that...
don't know we've studied.
Okay, I'll tell you later about what we've tried to do at that intersection.
We're done?
Thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you for coming.
The next deputant is Wayne Scott.
Thank you so much. Sorry about the props. This is medicinal. I'll keep it under here. Hopefully we won't need it. And these are 3 roses. We've got, let's see, Roger Dutois and Peter Kang and Adam Exel, the 3 cyclists that were killed in the last 3 weeks during Bike Month. I really appreciate the fact that we're discussing this yet again here, and I'd like to thank you all for being here to talk about it and your concern with all this. I've spoken with most of you over the years about this kind of stuff, and this is the type of stuff that brought us together, most of us. It's unconscionable that we're still talking about this. I dedicated my life in 1981 to trying to make my hometown a little safer for the people that live here. I don't get paid for it, but it's a duty, because as a non-motorist and somebody who has never even applied for a driver's license, I've been moving around this city for the last 65 years, and I've had no problems, except that it's unsafe on the streets because of the way other citizens behave. They're getting into these huge machines, 30 times the size of them, and that's how they figure they're going to move around the city. And then they sit there and they complain about the fact that they can't move because there's gridlock. They are the gridlock. We've got to start making our city safe for the people that live here, not the people that drive through it. And unfortunately, as I say, we've been talking about this for decades. If we want to change our city to where it truly is safe for the people that live here, the children, the seniors that are the real folks that are getting picked off on the streets. You look at the statistics, it's mainly seniors that are getting picked off. I know my mother-in-law on Eglinton, in Councillor Mahevik's ward, they can't get across the street on Eglinton because the lights are changed too quickly. They can't, they're imprisoned by the traffic that is going by, the car traffic, the motor vehicular traffic on our city streets. We have to deal with this. The idea that we cannot change the behavior of motorists by simply changing the speed limits on the street, I think is disingenuous. We certainly can. We don't always have to look at how we're going to enforce laws. There's an idea that underlies our society of compliance. Let's try that first. Let's change the speed limits to make them more realistic, and then allow for an education campaign to educate our citizens and to inform our citizens as to the damage they're doing to themselves and their families the way things are now. The status quo is not an option. We have to change. We're on the wrong side of history if we fight that change. Now, Toronto has backslid, if that's a word, in the last 4 years. It's unconscionable what we allowed to have happen in our city. We should all be hanging our heads in shame. I've been the automotive dependence reduction officer for the group I'm with, Hoof and Cycle, for over 20 years. And I've done a terrible job. You just have to look out on the street, right? But again, we've all been working to do that kind of stuff. We've all been trying to make our city safer. And if we pretend that this is not a way to do it, then we're lying to ourselves and we're lying to the people that you folks are here to represent. And I just want to, again, thank you for looking at this, but it is time for a change in Toronto. The 3 people that died in our municipal celebration in the last 3 weeks might still be around if, if these folks had a different way of looking at how they get through town. 2 of these folks that killed these people just kept driving. They didn't care. We have to speak to it. The speed limit reduction is a good start. It's baby steps, but quite frankly, it's baby steps from a 30-year-old living in his parents' basement. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No? I'll call the next deputant, Herb Van den Doel.
Thank you, councillors. I think many people were more eloquent than I was. I'll try to focus on my main point. I'm a resident of Ward 19. I have the privilege of living on a street that is quite quiet and zoned for 30. And I hope that most residents in Toronto get that same chance, no matter what street they live on. My wife has worked for a trauma unit where elderly are overrepresented as being injured while walking on the street, and this is unconscionable. I believe that the transportation staff were mistaken about these studies that are under consideration tonight. I think the real question here is not whether we should reduce speeds. The science is clear about that it saves lives. But the question is that can we just lower the speed limit and slap on some signs, and will it make a big difference? Dylan Reed this morning on Metro Morning said that there has been a study that showed that it did work in Missouri, and he elaborated on that tonight. Mr. Buckley had said there were other studies that showed different results, but while looking around, there don't seem to be any studies that actually addressed residential streets. They all focused on arterial or rural roads with high volumes and high speeds. So I don't see how they're quite relevant to this case. If we're going to be looking at the science, we should look at the appropriate science. And I'll admit that it's probably slim pickings in terms of the studies, but it seems to me that the Missouri study is one of the best things to look at this point in making your decision. So I hope you vote for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No? Thanks, Herb. Astrid Idlewild?
Good evening. My name is Astrid Idlewild. I am an urban planner. Thanks for listening to all of us on this matter tonight. Let's pass this item like we mean it, but before it's all wrapped up and the question's called, why don't we go the extra mile and make this item even better and see whether we can save up to $700 grand before adjournment. This evening, we're all here because citizens in Toronto, East York, and our community councillors acknowledge a mutual urgency to bring speed limits to our local streets into line with how we want to use them, how we want them to be used, and how we hope to shape them to enrich the social welfare of our local communities. Our own Dr. David McCune's findings on this matter are clear. Lowering velocities on local streets positively benefits the state of our public health. We're here tonight with a responsibility to show that adopting the good doctor's recommendations is totally doable without inducing negative externalities. Given this, it can only benefit us to improve on the integrity of this item as you move to decide in its favor. It's safe to say that we all want to be sure it's graced with the care it deserves so that it can help to define our community as a hospitable, economically fertile, and more equitable part of the city for anyone traveling within it. That said, I have two amendment ideas which may further improve a good thing. The first amendment is to reduce the cost of updating our existing signage. If passed as is, the staff's estimate to replace roughly 4,500 signs at $225 each tips at just over $1 million. The report, however, does not distinguish materials from labor. I mention this because earlier this year, Washington State Legislature proposed changing 50 speed limit signs along one of its highways. Much like today's item, its proposal calls for a one-digit change to that highway speed limit. The difference from our situation, however, is cost. State staff estimated that the total materials cost of DOT-approved reflective overlay stickers at $2,700. That means covering one digit with a sticker instead of tossing the entire sign. For Washington, that amounts to $54 a sign, or for us, about $66. Reflective overlay stickers are a great way to update our signage without cutting short the life cycle of our existing stock. Even without a bulk discount, our cost to update signs using overlay stickers would run us about $293K. By contrast, it's about $700,000 or 70% less than what our staff is proposing by replacing the entire signs. Meanwhile, the Second Amendment to solicit a staff report on feasibility for future adoption takes a longer view on what this item wants to accomplish. That is, better streets, friendlier streets, safer streets. This longer view includes a carrot for all of Toronto. It's a conservative observation that a speed limit reduction alone on our local streets won't be enough to change motorist habits as widespread as what we're aiming for, especially when motorist ideology is frequently at odds with the spirit of this item. With only one recent study arguing otherwise for a small town in Missouri, whose circumstances and motorist culture departs from our situation, we're 41 times larger than they are, there remains little material evidence to support that changing our speed limit signage alone will do the trick as effectively as we're envisioning it. So, here are 5 things you may want to have staff explore. 1, the feasibility of designating all local streets in Toronto East York as a novel Municipal Improvement District, or MID. 2, the feasibility of using tax increment financing to subsidize the capital cost of robust traffic calming infrastructure for this MID. 3, the feasibility of whether a TIF subsidy is well suited to this scale and whether the risk is fairly low for our city's strong credit rating. 4, the feasibility of adopting the above with a carrot to reduce residential property taxes for all of Toronto proportionate to the amount of the TIF subsidy for the MID. This carrot is a low-risk pledge that property values inside this MID will climb at a markedly faster pace if robust traffic calming infrastructure is in place. Why? Because living in this MID is awesome. And the acceleration in property values within this MID may offset both the TIF subsidy and reduced property tax rate. And lastly, the feasibility of echoing the same MID model for other areas of the city which are interested to follow this lead, provided that the above works out for Toronto East York.
We're not talking.
Anyway, that's all. Thanks for your brains and your time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No?
MID again?
Oh, it's an idea I came up with, Municipal Improvement District.
Municipal?
It's kind of borrowing from the idea that we in Ontario came up with the BIA in 1970, but it's a very privatized thing and whatnot. But this would actually look at taking the entire district, and I guess what I'm trying to say is the streets themselves become the district. The local streets do.
Very interesting.
And once you designate that, then you can actually then find a way to actually fund it more concretely, more focused.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Diane Hall.
Well, I'm actually both Diane Hall and Jerry Brown, and I was going to ask for a little extra time, but I actually need less if I'm 2 people.
Wonderful. Well, I will start your time and we'll go from there.
All right, awesome. And I may go a little over 5 minutes, but I think it is important. And if I had a vote, I'd vote for both of Astridge's things, by the way. My name is Jerry Brown, and I'm a resident of Ward 30, along with my spouse, Diane Hall. I'm here tonight not so much to speak directly to item TE 8.1 that's before you, but to speak to members of the Community Council about what efforts will be needed to really make Toronto streets safe for everyone. You've already reviewed the staff report from the General Manager that spells out far better than I can some of the nuances regarding how effective a simple 30-kilometer-per-hour limit will be in delivering safety results and the financial costs that will be associated with accomplishing those results, which is why Astridge's idea is fantastic. I think there's obvious merit in imposing a 30-kilometer-per-hour limit because of the clear message that it sends to all residents about the value of safety, and because of the simple fact that at that speed, 85% of pedestrians could survive a vehicle collision. But that message isn't enough. What the city must do moving forward is to bring a complete rethinking of our streets. In connection with that rethinking, I attended the Complete Streets open house last week. I think it's fantastic that the city is developing guidelines around complete streets and bringing in the expertise of a firm such as TEYCC to help with that process. And if I can give a shout out to Adam Popper, I think he's going to come up with some great stuff. The work already done by the city planning and transportation staff is excellent, and I think when the guidelines are established, they will be a real step forward for Toronto. But it's incredibly ironic and sad to note that Roger Dutoit, a principal of that firm, was killed while cycling weeks before the unveiling of the new Queen's Quay, a street that he helped to design. I was there on the weekend and observed the mixing of users along the street. It's a great example of what a street can be when all modes of transportation are given consideration. But what is even sadder than Roger's death is the fact that he isn't the only person to die on our streets this year. He's joined by 2 other cyclists, 21 pedestrians, and 7 drivers. These numbers are simply unacceptable. The silver lining is that the knowledge and expertise to solve this problem is available. Sweden's Vision Zero reduced fatalities that were already lower than ours by over 50%. The version adopted in 2014 in New York is just now beginning to show results. And we all know the experience in many cities that have made cycling infrastructure a part of their city streets in order to give cyclists a separated and safe pathway to negotiate city streets. With City Council's decision to direct the General Manager to undertake the study of a road safety plan for Toronto, you'll be reviewing a proposal to deal with this issue by the end of this year or early in 2016. I would therefore urge each of you to consider any decision on today's item as the first of many that you'll be asked to consider. It's a great start and will move us in the right direction in terms of establishing that we want Toronto to be a truly livable city, but I would ask you to decide if any deaths on our streets are acceptable. If your answer is no, then what steps must we take and what resources must we allocate to reach the goal of 0 deaths? I'd also ask each of you if you agree that all Toronto streets should be complete streets. Again, if the answer is yes, then safety for all users is the overriding priority for all the street design. That's where the guidelines start. I also attended the memorial ride last week for Adam Excel. It was the first memorial ride I've ever attended for a fellow cyclist, and quite frankly, I hope it's also the last. Your job as councillors requires you to balance many competing interests and constituencies in making decisions. So in making those decisions in future, I'd ask you how much Adam Excel's life was worth. How much was Erica Stark's life worth? Sadly, I could fill up the rest of my 5 minutes asking the question 29 more times. So instead, I'll ask you to take on the role of safety ambassador for Toronto. In carrying out that role, you would bring a certain mindset to every meeting of City Council. And when you're considering the allocation of the city's scarce financial resources, you'd factor in how much each citizen's life is worth. I hope that if you do that, you'll make decisions that help us to build a truly livable city, one that works for everyone. See, I would have been at 4 minutes and 15 seconds. But after I wrote this, I heard Mayor Tory on the news, and he said there is not one solution that is going to address the problem in its entirety, which I completely agree with. He went on to suggest a public awareness campaign. He's close on that, but we need something more. We need an attitude shift so that we go back to respecting each other on our roads. On Saturday at the ride, I had to ask the driver of a very large vehicle to move off a crosswalk at an intersection that was filled with over 200 people who had gathered to commemorate a man who was, by all accounts, a wonderful person. And he was angry that I was asking. He was mad. And you know what? We're all mad. We got to get somewhere. He's there. He's like, oh my God. And he was mad until he realized what was happening. He watched Adam's family and friends walk inches by his bumper until he probably imagined what that might feel like if one of his 2 children, safely tucked into the back seat, had been the rider of that ghost bike. And he understood that we were claiming this tiny little piece of Toronto streets for the next 5 or 10 minutes. That was our street. That was Adam's, the last time he was alive. Cyclists shouldn't have to beg for a safe part of the road. And each one of us, whether pedestrians, cyclists, or drivers, could do better in terms of getting along with each other. Maybe that's the message that needs to go along with the speed limit reduction. So my ask of you changed. I want you to become ambassadors for Ziyang Kang.
Mr. Brown, in the interest of fairness, I am going to have to cut you off. Sum us up.
Or for any of the residents who died on our streets, and ambassadors for Adam Excel, and we will do everything in our power to see that he's the last name on this list. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions of the deputant? Nope, seeing none. Thank you, sir. Karen Buck. Karen, you'll have 5 minutes, and I'll start the clock on my right.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening. I'm here tonight to just tell you that it's not just my opinion. I actually did a survey on our street to see what the feeling was toward the 30-kilometer reduction from 40 kilometers. And Ludi Avenue is where I live. It's in Ward 32. It's a residential area consisting mostly of single and semi-detached homes There are 2 triple attached housing units and 1 apartment complex consisting of 8 apartments. So that makes a total of 83 units on Ludi Avenue. Each unit, while it might house 2 families, was only counted once because there were never conflicting answers from any one house, and was recorded as 1 vote per each of the 88 units. And the result of the survey was, which included a neighborhood email shutout and a door-to-door canvass, was that there is support for what you are doing in putting in a blanket 30-kilometer on local roads. Out of the 83 units on Ludi Avenue, south of the commercial lane, 45 were in support of the 30-kilometer speed limit, 2 were not in favor, and 2 remained undecided. Out of the 83 units on Ludi Avenue, there was no response for 34 units. So 45 supporters out of 83 units is a total of 45% overall result. Or you could look at it a bit differently, and of those, 49 were the ones who responded, with 2 not in support and 2 undecided, and that's a 92% result. So thank you for this opportunity just to bring forward a survey that showed a whole street and how they feel about it.
Thank you very much. It looks like you have a question. Councillor McMahon.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for all your great work on this. Can I just ask you, how long did that take you to do that for your street?
The shout-out probably, well, we have a neighborhood email. And so it actually got about 17 of the results on email, which was easy for me. And the rest of it took, I would say, at the most, 3 hours.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. John Tiranu?
Hi.
Hey there, John.
My laptop. I have some pictures to show you because, let's see if this works.
It's like we've got our amazing tech support, Andy, on it.
Okay. VJ? Two.
You don't.
It's much nicer looking at pictures than it is staring at my face.
There's no ad.
Let's see if this works. This doesn't work. Okay, so my name is John Torino. I'm representing 2 groups here, Cycle Toronto Midtown and the Deer Park Residents Group. We're in the Midtown area, so roughly, say, 8-minute walk from Yonge and St. Clair. We have, I think, in our ward, the highest rate of transit use in the city, and every transit user is also a pedestrian. We have high rates of walking, increasing numbers of cyclists, and obviously a lot of drivers as well. We're a mixed-use community with a lot of low-density housing and a lot of high-rises as well, so it's kind of a microcosm of Toronto as a whole. But I'm actually not here to talk about Toronto. I'm here to talk about another city. That's Paris, Paris, France. The big one, which I don't know if any of you here have been to Paris, but one of the things that struck me the last time I was there was just how many cars there are everywhere. The French do love their cars. I mean, it's hard to see a movie about Paris that doesn't involve the Champs-Élysées in some way, which is a giant river of cars, or the huge roundabout around the Arc de Triomphe in the background features prominently in many movies about Paris, and it's a crazy whirligig of a roundabout multiple lanes wide. The French have a long history of motorsports, of automobiles. They're very proud of their national car companies. Cars feature prominently in Paris. And they're not really working out that well. This is the Champs-Élysées. 50 years of trying to design the city for cars have largely been a failure. Traffic congestion is awful. People are fed up with it. It's hard to fit increasing numbers of people and increasing numbers of cars in a major metropolitan world city and to make it work. The most glaring example is the Boulevard Périphérique. That's the ring road around the edge of Paris, which is probably one of the most frustrating places on the planet. In the last 10 years or so, Paris has been moving towards a rebalancing of transportation options. Cars are still there, they're not banned, but there's an increasing focus on making it more accessible and safer for pedestrians, for cyclists, for transit users, for goods movement, for basically for everyone who needs to get around in a city, not just single passenger vehicles. And one of the greatest such initiatives was the recently passed blanket 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit across all but, I think, 4 streets in the entire city. This was done because it's just simpler to have a single speed limit, so you don't have to go up and down 30, 40, 50, back down to 30. And it's a blanket one, so you don't even need to invest in different speed limit signs. You just get the same one printed. It's cheaper that way. Other cities have followed suit. London's doing a similar initiative. New York City has moved to reduce speed limit signs, but this is probably the best example around the world. This is done with a recognition that, of course, we're all pedestrians, and the most vulnerable road users need protection. And obviously in a city like Paris, this also has economic benefits, considering that it's, I believe, the #1 city for tourism in the world. Now, back to our Toronto. This is my neck of the woods. Unfortunately, this only applies to the streets in gray. It's a great initiative, and we thank, first of all, Councillor Matlow for asking for this in Ward 22. This is something that our local residents association had asked for years, and thank you for not only getting this in the city, but we also want to thank all the other councillors at the Toronto East York Community Council for wanting to extend this to their wards as well. It's great to have a blanket initiative that everybody can agree on. But unfortunately, it's a first step, but unfortunately this only covers the gray roads, not the other colored roads, which are where the vast majority of the collisions, injuries, and deaths happen. So in our ward, this means quite a few roads, actually. As you go downtown, there aren't very many roads that would be covered by the 30-kilometer speed limit. Most of them either have traffic calming or have other classifications, and obviously very high levels of pedestrians on almost all those streets. And even in other parts of Toronto East York, a large number of streets are unfortunately excluded by the initiative. Looking at Paris, they didn't just reduce speed limits, they did other things. So they paired this with a reduction in auto infiltration on local streets, fantastic protected separated bike lanes across the entire city, and separated bus lanes, which of course cyclists are actually allowed to ride on, because they recognize that moving people in single occupant vehicles is far less efficient than through public transit. So maybe we could look at Paris, at what another great world city has done to improve transportation for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor McMahon.
Great visuals, love them. Need to move there. So your sign,
We can import it here.
Watch your grandkids. So the sign, the 30K sign or 30K sign back there. So was that alone, just by itself, or was that accompanied with street paintings as well, road painting?
They have a combination, yeah. There's street markings, there's textures, there's all kinds of curb treatments. It's a whole plethora. I don't believe it's fully implemented yet. It was only passed, I think, last year and supposed to be installed. It takes a while, obviously. It's a large city. But it does include a wide variety of treatments.
Great, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Nope, seeing none. Thank you very much. The last speaker I have on the list here is Mike Zekos. Mike, if you could join us. Zekis. Sorry, I must have wrote it. My apologies. I may have written down your name wrong. That's
quite all right.
On my sheet. If there are any other members of the public who wish to speak, if you could go see the clerk to our right there with his hand up, just so we can have your name and we don't miss you. Mike, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of council, I'm here to urge this council to support the 30K limit on all streets in downtown Toronto. I do so not just because I live in the city of Toronto, but I would have done so if I was still the councillor up in Scarborough. I think this is an initiative that should actually go across the city, but we're here today just to speak to the streets that this council represents. I live in Councillor Matlow's ward. My partner lives in Etobicoke, yet the things that I see up in North Toronto, specifically on Duplex Avenue, the dangers that are faced there, people in Etobicoke face on a daily basis too. In fact, just recently, a group got together to try to get speed bumps put in there because they couldn't get the speed reduced. And they were, even though I think the percentages were 69% were in support of it just from initially, and then the figures went up to 75% ultimately. They missed the warrant by 1 kilometer instead of 50 kilometers an hour that in a 40-kilometer zone. They found cars going at 49K, and then they were told that they couldn't get the speed bumps for that reason. If we just take speed bumps aside for a second and just deal with the issue on Duplex Avenue, Councillor Matlow will tell you that, and it's on page 16 of your report, it's just south of Eglinton down to Davisville. Street parking is allowed on that street. It's really only it's only a 2-lane street, yet cars speed down that street all the time. Invariably, cars going southbound are coming into the northbound lane. It makes it very dangerous for people like my mother, who has lived there since 1962, to get across the street to get to see some of the relatives and friends that she knows in that area. I'll speak anecdotally so that you know I'm here to represent her as well and people in her age bracket. She turned 87 years old 4 days ago. At her party that was attended by relatives and neighbors alike, I took the opportunity to ask them how they felt about this initiative. There wasn't one person that didn't agree with you moving this initiative today. That takes care of people in the 87 years of age bracket. But there were people there who were young husbands and wives, young mothers and fathers, and grandchildren too. I'll give you a little story that I think you can will make my point for me, and then I'll stop. When my daughter was old enough for my mother to take across that street, actually I'll go even further. In '62, I could play hockey on that street. We were just like Mike Myers, you know, we'd call if we saw a car every now and then. These days, nobody can play hockey on that street. My mother could take my daughter across to Manor Road, which is a dead-end street, so she could see the subways on the bridge that connects it to Yonge Street. She can't take her grandchild now. She's afraid to, not just because she's 87, but she wouldn't do it if she was younger. The traffic is that bad, and they're speeding. It's a 40K limit, but nobody does 40K. Invariably, they're speeding just to get, through a street that sits right next to Yonge Street. So Duplex has almost become an arterial road. The people of Manor Road have become ingenious. They have shut the street off sometimes with pylons just to get, the whole neighborhood needs a safe place to play, so they use Manor Road, the dead-end street, to play in. And every one of them, when I asked them if they wanted the speeds reduced to 30K, all said yes. So without anybody saying no and everybody saying yes, I think that's a strong mandate for this council to take this initiative forward to all of council. And I hope it one day reaches Scarborough and Etobicoke as well.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of the deputant? No? Thank you. I've got...
Mr. Chairman, somebody left their...
Uh-oh. There you go. Solving problems all around the committee room. Dane Gregus? Hi there, Dane.
Thanks for letting me speak tonight. Most accidents occur at intersections. And that's where the most attention needs to take place. By elevating crossings and highlighting them, and slowing traffic passing through the intersection by all users to an equal speed, benefits can be achieved for all users. This topographical approach, centered in the crossings, will have the most value by equalizing speeds for all users through the intersection so that they can all pass and intermesh safely. Many of our all-stop intersections we have were the first attempt at traffic calming. I grew up in this city. There was no stop signs. There was no 40-kilometer-an-hour speed limits. There even were these yellow yield signs everywhere. Now, all of a sudden, everything became a knee-jerk reaction. There'd be a stop sign, there'd be a stop sign, there'd be a stop sign, and things just got slower and slower and actually worse and worse. What we need to do is have this 30-kilometer speed limit, but also have elevated intersections. So the places we meet each other are the safest places. So that when people get there, they all know that they have to attain and maintain a certain speed so that they're all intermeshing and interconnecting at the same speed so that this can be done safely. That's about it. My last thing I'd like to say is my favorite traffic calming measure that I've seen lately is these boxes the police have been putting around that show you your speed. And they, I think, have the most impact. So if that lady said we could get those stickers, maybe we could use that other 700 grand and buy a couple more of those. And I think that would really work.
Thank you very much, Dane. Are there any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, are there any other members of the public who wish to speak to this item? No? Then we'll start on our questions of staff. I've got a list forming. There's been some requests about the possibility of doing 2 rounds. Why don't we do this? Why don't we start off and you can ask questions of any of the staff, and if we need a second round of questions, then we'll move on from there, keeping in mind certain members of the media need to make it back and cut together the tape to put together for the evening news. So let's start things off with Councillor Fragadakis, and I'll keep a list here.
Okay, great. So these are to the medical officer of health or his representative. Sorry, what's? Oh, Monica. Monica, hi. So is this decrease in speed limits likely to encourage walking and cycling in neighborhoods?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
I said, is this decrease in speed limits likely to encourage walking and cycling in neighborhoods?
Sorry, absolutely. It would definitely create a feeling of calmness and conduciveness to being out and having active transportation. So the benefit is not just reduced injuries from collisions, it's also the benefit of people being physically active, having social cohesion in the neighborhood. So it's a very positive, strong measure.
So could you tell me more about the dynamics of greater use of a road by pedestrians and cyclists result in improving the safety of that road for those modes of travel?
Sorry, the dynamics?
So a greater use of a road by pedestrians and cyclists and the result of it improving the safety on that road for those modes of travel. So there's a dynamic.
Again, when you have slower speeds on roads in general, and particularly in residential areas, which are places where the community gets together, where children play, where they walk their dog and so on, by having slower speeds in those neighborhoods, again, you will have more physical activity and more engagement of the community. So it's, it's a positive relationship.
Okay, will this initiative make the roads safer for motorists?
Probably would make the roads safer for motorists because they would be less likely to have a collision. Yes.
Okay. How else can we improve walkability in our neighborhoods?
How else do we improve walkability in our neighborhoods? Well, through planning measures, having destinations to walk to, being able to walk to the local supermarket, being able to walk to the local community center, having children being able to walk to their friends. These are all measures that enable a city to be designed in a way to be walkable So that's a piece of the equation of a more walkable neighborhood. The other part is to ensure safety, to ensure sidewalks, ideally on both sides of the street, and of course to bring traffic calming to those streets.
Okay, the 2012 Road to Health report advises that a startling 93% of Toronto youth are not meeting the recommended daily requirements needed to derive health benefits from physical activity. Is the problem of youth and lack of exercise been getting better since 2011 here in Toronto?
No, we've not seen any major improvements in physical activity in youth or in older populations for that matter.
Okay, great. So thank you very much. Next questions are to transportation services. So on page 3 of the report, it says that the data presented does not include data related to collisions that have occurred where the collisions were identified as unknown in the accident reports. Do we know how many accident reports identify collisions as unknown?
Through the chair here. Yeah, there are sometimes unknown locations are whether or not they incurred. On the police officers often or at times do not fill in all the boxes about a definitive location. So we actually do scrub the data on those if we don't have a definitive location.
Okay. One deputy said that the city's own number suggests we could have saved 12 pedestrians and 4 cyclists' lives in the last 4 years. Does that extrapolation seem correct?
I'd be cautious in saying that implementing this is going to bring the fatalities and collisions down to 0. There are a whole host of 80 to 90% of collisions involve inattentive behavior, human error, and that can be on the part of the driver, the pedestrian, or the cyclist. So I'm not necessarily comfortable saying that that they would all have been avoided with just a reduction in the speed limit.
Well, I wasn't asking about it, them all being eliminated, but they could have gone down?
Yes, if the speed limits would come down, then there would be a chance that the fatalities would have come down.
Okay, so in the report it says that this could take 2 to 3 years, or it would cost more. How much would it cost to do this in 1 year?
The cost would be the same. I think what we wanted to point out actually is the number of the crew time that would take. So we would likely to do this, if we didn't use in-house forces, we would bring on temporary workers to do this work. And again, we're looking at a period of likely 2 to 3 crew years. So obviously, if we increase the number of crews, they'd be hired for a shorter period, and we would get the installation out there quicker.
But the cost is the same.
It should be approximately the same.
Okay. So I know we're developing complete streets guidelines, but other than redesigning our streets, what can we do to improve pedestrian and cycling safety on our streets?
Again, engineering is one component, and I get nervous at times. I think while it is the big wave right now, it is also the most expensive approach. Again, back to the point that 80 to 90% is human error. I think we don't necessarily do the job we need to on both the education and the enforcement side.
So we could be doing a better job on education and better job of enforcement, in your opinion?
Yes.
Okay.
If I'm going to cut you off there, and my apologies, Councillor, we're at 5 minutes now, and in the interest of fairness amongst councillors, I'm going to stick to the clock. I also believe there to be a finite number of questions in relation to this particular item. So let's make sure we can spread them around. That's not a challenge, Councillor Davis.
Okay.
But Councillor Davis, you're the next on my list, so 5 minutes.
I may not even take that. I want to get at the process that is proposed as an alternative to using a default approach, and that is what you set out in your presentation, what was approved by council. But I first wanted to ask you if you have information about how many requests we get per year for traffic calming.
Through the chair, annually about 50 requests to study.
How many?
50.
That can't be true. I'm sorry.
I've seen my work.
All right. I don't mean that. I'm surprised. I'm talking about people who not just through our offices, but who contact the city, who have concerns about speeding. 311, does 311 have any data on how many people call to complain about speeding? Or?
Yeah, through the chair, your specific question was about that process. People calling in, though, if we were to initiate a study which cost $1,000, $2,000 of staff time to do a study every time someone called up, and we do have people that do this, it would be a tremendous burn on city resources, and at times we often find it's warranted. So putting a threshold in there actually serves to try to sort of vet some of these, because if there isn't, we don't want just one person bringing along a request to spend thousands of dollars of city time to study.
I don't know which question you're answering, but
You asked me about...
I asked, are there people, I want
Yes,
to get
you
a
said-
sense if you have any data, either through 311, general inquiries, phone calls.
I could
to
pull
your
traffic
division,
operations study
find out
requests
how
for you,
many
Counselor,
people
if
are-
that would help. I could provide
Yes,
that.
that would be.
It would be in the thousands, though.
It would be in the thousands, not 8.
Traffic
Traffic
related.
calming. Okay, or 40 or whatever you said. So my second question did have to do with how much it costs to undertake the study on a case-by-case basis, that it's going to be similar to traffic calming, where there's there's an investigation, there's a consultation, there's a poll, there's a review against a set of criteria, all of that. How much will it cost for one of these reviews for the 30?
Through the chair, staff are estimating about $3,000 to $4,000 per study.
$3,000 to $4,000 for every review for a request to put. And how many streets are there signed at 40 kilometers in these maps that you've given us?
I could tell you the kilometerage, I couldn't tell you the streets, Counselor.
I just want to establish how much it would cost overall if we all said, please undertake a study of all streets in our wards.
Well, in most requests, Counselor, it does tend to be a road segment, so we do typically...
A block?
Several blocks. I mean, we typically would not, often we work with local counselors to see, is this an issue you're seeing on several blocks here? And would it be worthwhile to actually include several blocks within one study?
And your criteria, I've got too much paper. The process for initiating one of these studies, it can be initiated through a councillor request?
Through the chair, it was actually in the 30K policy, the recommended approach was to come through with a petition.
Okay. Unlike the traffic calming?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to understand this issue of the default. Is it possible, I understand that the 50 kilometer an hour default speed limit is a provincial regulation, correct?
That is correct.
And we aren't in a position to declare a default, and that's why we have to put signs on every street?
We could petition the province to request a change to the default limit.
And that is my motion. That's very helpful. So I wondered, too, if...
It would have to be based on the entire municipality, though.
I understand, but we could start in certain areas. This is, there's currently a coroner's report I've just looked up as a result of the submission tonight. Is it not the case that in the coroner's report, they recommended reducing residential streets to 30 kilometers an hour?
If I remember correctly, I believe they were requesting that the default be dropped to 40 kilometers per hour.
I'll show you the recommendations. There is a recommendation to reduce to 30.
No. Her question was what
The
was...
coroner's report, I was asking
Correct.
about if you
I believe there
knew.
was two recommendations.
Yes.
One was local to 30 and default to 40.
I'm asking about local to 30.
Okay.
Yes. You concur that that was recommended?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. I'll just follow up on that with the coroner's report because I've had it printed out, and coroner's pretty clear here. Municipalities should, in developing their complete streets approach, consider reducing speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour on residential streets. Does the coroner indicate that you would have to have a petition to do that?
No, it does say consider, though.
It does say consider, but there's many ways to consider. So in interpreting the coroner's recommendation, is that somewhere it's nowhere in this little PowerPoint that we got tonight?
So staff, we prepared our own recommendations as much as we took the coroner's recommendations under advisement.
I see. So your own recommendations are not based on the coroner's, or I guess I'm just interested in how you're interpreting that, because one of the deputants was very strong on the issue of equity and that the importance of all streets being treated the same. And in the warrants that you've presented to us today, it would require 10% of multiple family dwellings. And would you agree with me that sometimes the response rate is not the same between straight single-family homes and large numbers of apartments or multi-res? Yes?
We would agree, and that's why the proposal for the petition is 10% for multi-res and 25% for single-family.
Would you agree that there's a lot of streets that have single-family, second language speakers and large numbers on the street that may not be reading the petition or part of that street life? Did you take that into account?
We would just, that's just to initiate the study. When we do things like polling, we do actually account for local language issues.
But why would we have to, since traffic calming in the city does not depend upon a petition, why have you introduced that in this particular instance? Who advised you to do it?
A petition is a route for local traffic calming, Council. It is one of the
It's one
routes.
route. Who advised on this method?
The staff made a determination. It was the
Your staff
report. Yes.
advised you. And who advised on 4 elements being met, A and B being required? But once we get down to C or D, C, it's only a school zone, a parkland, or where there's cycling. So if you're not any of those, C doesn't count for you. Would you agree with me?
Or under D.
Sorry, one, either C or D has to also be met. So if you're not a school zone, parkland, or cycling, then you have to go for D. Would you agree?
That is correct.
And D has an absence of sidewalks. So one of the ways you get 30 kilometers an hour is if you don't have any sidewalks. Am I reading that right, one of the criteria here?
That is right.
If you don't have sidewalks, then you should be 30, but if you have sidewalks, somehow you wouldn't have 30?
To create a safer pedestrian environment, yes.
Pedestrian, I see, okay. And lack of safe stopping distance, horizontal curve, what does that mean? A bump or a turn?
Horizontal curve is,
So horizontal curve, less than 200 meters apart, so a windy road is basically. So if you have no sidewalks and you have to meet 3 of the 4 elements there, which are absence of sidewalks, significant parking, windy road, lack of safe stopping distance, and if you have a sidewalk and a straight road, you would not meet those criteria. Am I right?
that'd be correct, Council.
That'd be correct. So now nobody's going to have 30 because nobody's going to meet, if you don't have a school zone, a parkland, or a bike lane, you'd forget it. And if you have some sidewalks and a straight road, you don't meet D, so it's over before it starts. And I'm just not sure how we ever got to that. So the issue of $3,000 to $4,000 per one of these sessions to find out no windy road and you've got some sidewalks, so forget it, compared to $225 for a sign. Don't you think there's a pretty big discrepancy? I guess there's about $3,000 discrepancy, because you might go out and start this and find out it doesn't match the warrants, just like happens on speed dumps all the time. So what is the $225 comprised of? How do you break that down for that sign?
Typically, that's an all-inclusive price we would do for the manufacturing of the sign and the installation.
Pardon me?
The manufacturing of the sign and the installation.
So is there some reason why you could not put a sticker or a piece of vinyl over the 4?
Yes, there is. In some cases, many of our signs actually don't currently meet the latest reflectivity issues. So There's a new standard now for how signs have to be able to reflect light, and if those standards aren't met, you cannot.
So if our signs...
Thank you very much. Councillor Fletcher, I am going to have to cut you off that question. Councillor Mahavik.
Yes, thank you. There's a cost to the street-by-street approach, which I think many of us have explored very vigorously. And that cost is $3,000 to $4,000 per street or section of street. Would that be fair to say?
I think you would say segment of street.
Segment of street?
A reasonably sized segment, half kilometer to a kilometer, could be analyzed pretty.
And then there's the cost of the speed humps. You get 30 kilometers as you install speed humps. And they're about $10,000 a pop?
Speed humps are about $3,000 per unit. $3,000.
How come when we want them, they're 10? When you don't want them, they're 3?
Well, typically, we do put them in, and over the course of a block, you may have several speed humps located within one block segment.
Yes, but, you know, honest to God, when we want them, they're 10,000. When you don't want them, they're 3,000. Okay, so whatever. Okay. So shouldn't these be counted in the ledger? Like, you've obviously built a case, $1 million case for why we might want to consider differently, which I'm not sure how that's going to go.
Well,
but shouldn't this, frankly, for the sake of fairness, be counted on the savings side of the ledger? All this staff time, all this speed hump, because many of us, frankly, we've gone the 30-kilometer route by virtue of, you know, I'm the speed hump king. I have more speed humps than anybody, and the reason is because people want 30.
I'm not, Councilor, I don't understand your question in terms of the savings here, but on the cost side, this is the cost of a sign, and we're asked to put how many signs must you change, how much does it cost, that is the price. There's no case being made one way or another.
Okay, yes, but would you not, okay, then I'll put it this way. Would you not agree that there are savings, potentially even in the hundreds of thousands, by not having to go through a street-by-street or segment-by-segment approach, and also needing all those streets to have speed humps when sometimes people don't want speed humps, they just want 30K?
Well, and again, I think staff will take the position that we believe that 30K works best with the presence of traffic calming, and the way to achieve that works best, and perhaps the numbers tell out on this, with the presence of traffic calming.
Okay, so my next question is this, still on the money side. Let's assume that it passes here, and you know, my reading of the wind says that it will pass here.
I'll keep asking questions. Is that a call to vote?
What happens next? That's really important to me. The way it usually happens is it basically goes to you and it gets implemented. Will that be the case here?
For this price tag, we don't have the budget to be able to cover this program in the 2015 budget. So it would come forward likely in 2016 for the full cost of the program.
That never happens with speed humps. It never happens with other traffic signs. Never happens for any other program.
Well, we have funding and programs for speed humps, Councillor, so when there's funding in place for those, there's not funding in place right now for $1 million of additional signage.
Okay, okay, I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. How many mobile speed trailers do we have in Transportation Department?
Currently, Councillor, we have 4 mobile speed signs, and then last year, under a pilot, we've installed 10 permanent speed signs.
Sorry, say that again?
We have 4 mobile speed signs right now.
4. And then they're usually used at construction sites and whatnot?
No, they're typically rotated when councilors request it, we would try to put them in the queue, and we do typically move them around every few weeks.
Well, there's one on Woodfield right now. Primarily, I believe, because of the Leslie Barnes debacle. I don't know. And I didn't request that, but it's great it's there. So I thought that some were motored around because of construction sites, but that's not your...
Through the chair, actually, it was as part of that specific location, through community consultation for the construction project, the issue was raised, so it was installed at that location for that specific construction project.
Okay.
But typically, we don't confine them just to construction.
Right, okay. So if you look on my map of wonderful Ward 32, which is the last map in your package, and if you look up in the right-hand corner, where you have Ted Reeves subdivision, or some people call Upper Beach Estates, it's 50K. I mean, why, how did that happen?
Because it was not actively changed, the default speed limit on it is still 50 kilometers per hour. And to be honest with you, in many locations, because of the short distance or the short length of the roadway, it doesn't become much of an issue because often it's a small closed community, and often you couldn't even get to 50 kilometers per hour if you intended to.
So for a new subdivisions are automatically 50K?
That is the default unless it's changed by council.
Scary. Okay, okay. Well, so I was hoping to change that here, but I guess, well, I'll talk about that in my speaking. Okay, and my last question, okay, so now I'm on to signage, and we saw those funky signs from Paris that are just so simple. Just, there's no verbiage or essay or banter, it's just a number, so everyone, regardless of your first language, can figure that out. It's fantastic. So do we ever do those kinds, like just 30?
Through the chair, we are actually required by law to put up provincially designed signs, so they must conform to certain standards of look, and feel, and text size. So that is, the signs that are on the street conform with that to make them enforceable.
And then do we ever do street road paintings or paving, whatever you call it, road paintings that they have in Europe with the, I was in Ireland recently, and they had the 230 signs, and they were red and white, and then on the road in front, it was like one of the bike boxes at intersections. It was a square, rectangular, that was red and white with a 32. So if you missed the two signs there, you definitely saw the sign on the road. Do we ever do that kind of painting?
We don't typically use that. As a sort of an alert to drivers, it may be useful. They roughly cost in the probably $1,000 to $2,000 range to install those types of installations.
Do you like those? Have you seen them?
I've seen them. So
Do you like them?
to get people's attention, they can be useful.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Any more? There are more questions, I suspect. No, I have a couple questions, and I was going to have an assistant here to deliver some of them. Maybe I'll wait for those ones, though. To the medical officer of health, the report from 2012 says that by improving safety for pedestrians and cyclists in Toronto, the direct costs associated with collisions could be reduced. And do you have the number in front of you of what that number is and how much it could be reduced?
No, I'm sorry, I don't actually have the number or the report in front of me, but it was very significant. It was in the millions.
62 million.
Thank you.
Would be pretty close to that. Or does that sound about right?
Sounds quite right.
And the economic benefits of putting a more appropriate value on it, if one can put a value on it, which you did, in terms of indirect cost of the productivity or the economic value of a life saved versus a life lost, ranged in your report from 130 million to 478 million. Is that about right?
That is about right, yes,
So
absolutely.
we're looking at a cost savings in well of excess of perhaps billions.
That's correct.
Also in that report, there was a mention of how well this actual strategy of reducing speed limits has worked in other jurisdictions. Would you care to elaborate?
Pardon me, there have been studies, evaluation studies done in London, England, which have demonstrated that speed reduction definitely reduces collisions involving personal injury, so that they're actually quite effective. There have been other European jurisdictions looking at it as well, particularly in Austria, where they have taken a very aggressive approach in some cities to reduce, again, speed limits. And again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but my recollection is the savings or the reduction in collisions involving injury would have been in the range of 20 to 40%.
And your report says that in London, after it was reduced to 30-kilometer-per-hour zones, these zones experienced a 42% reduction in fatalities.
Sounds right.
Are you aware that there's a campaign all across the UK called 20 is Plenty?
Yes.
And that's to reduce to 20 kilometers an hour. Miles, which was
is
roughly equivalent to 30
per hour.
kilometers.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. To the General Manager of Transportation. This was your first slide you put up, and I was quite taken about how dramatic the decrease was. Do you recognize this slide as being in your first presentation to the Public Works Department in 2013? Do you remember what the next slide was?
That one.
The 20 is Plenty campaign. Was this 20 is in Plenty campaign in operation in Philadelphia?
No, it wasn't.
Did you reduce the speeds of downtown streets to 20?
We were in consultation about doing something like this.
So this was the consultation that was going on. And the 20 is Plenty campaign is now in operation in the U.S. as well.
I think it's more of a slogan. Most cities in the U.S. have gone from 30 miles per hour to 25 miles per hour.
Most cities in the U.S. have gone to 20 miles per hour.
New York City recently.
Okay, New York City most recently. Now, would you concur with the studies that were cited in the Medical Officer of Health report in 2012?
If the speed limit comes down and if combined with an enforcement campaign, I believe.
Were you aware that the World Health Organization actually recommends that setting rates and enforcing are the most, quote, most effective way of decreasing accidents and fatalities?
Yes, that's what they've stated.
And that 1 kilometer per hour decrease can actually reduce road collisions by 2 to 3%. If you can achieve it.
I would, yes.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? To speak, Councillor Matlow.
On behalf of the Community Council, I have a motion.
Great.
You're going to speak.
That the Toronto East York Community Council reduce the speed limit from 40 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour on all local roads within the confines of the Toronto and East York Community Council, excluding those roads that bound more than one Community Council area. 2, authorize the appropriate city staff to take the necessary action to implement the foregoing reduction in the speed limit, including the introduction of the necessary bills to the Toronto East York Community Council. I also fully endorse the amendment that Councillor Perks has been working on that you will see soon, which is very complimentary and incredibly helpful. So first of all, I don't subscribe to this artificial division that I think some try to create in our city about this, war against the car versus war against the bike versus pedestrian. It's divisive and unhelpful rhetoric that might get you a soundbite, and it might hurt people who have an opposing opinion, but it's not actually helpful for a thoughtful conversation about how to make the city safe for every single resident. I personally am a driver, and I ride a bike, and I'm a pedestrian, and I take transit. And I think Councillor Layden would be happy to know that I also own a canoe. But I digress. We have a serious problem. Yes, and I also have a stroller for my daughter. We've got a serious problem in Toronto. We have thousands of pedestrian injuries and far too many fatalities every single year, not only here in Midtown and downtown Toronto, but also across the city. When I moved the motion last year to explore the idea of lowering speed limits, like many cities around the world, as has been stated, as I've already done. It took a long time for staff to bring forward the report. In fact, we asked for it, I believe, in February of this year, and it only has come forward now. In between, there was a report that went to council that I think we supported because we want things to move incrementally forward. That being said, though, there are a lot of faults with the plan that staff brought to council through PWIC. One is that it's a street-by-street process. It's ad hoc. It's a mishmash. It's a mishmash approach that doesn't create the predictability, as Mr. Buckley stated, which is helpful for drivers when they're entering neighborhoods to understand. The city needs to set a predictable speed limit to change the culture in neighborhoods. And we have a medical officer of health report that so clearly told us, so clearly and unequivocally told us, that the difference between a child or any pedestrian or any bicyclist or anyone being hit by a vehicle at 30 kilometers per hour versus 40 kilometers per hour is literally a difference between life and death. So how can we ignore that? How can we ignore that kind of advice? We have cities like New York and Portland, and as John Torreno said earlier, Paris, cities around the world that have already been implementing this strategy. Baden, Austria, as Monica stated earlier, Monica said that she didn't have the numbers, I do. Baden, Austria lowered the speed limits to 30 kilometers per hour in about 75% of their road network. And since it was implemented, along with some other measures, there have been a 60% reduction in road fatalities. So we know this based on all the evidence internationally to be true. How can we ignore it? So some have said, well, it's great, whatever number you want to put on the sign, that's fine, but what about police enforcement? It's not an either-or question. Frankly, whether you have 20 kilometers or 30 kilometers or 40 or no matter what you have, we still expect that there be police presence and enforcement in our neighborhoods. And if there isn't a good enough job being done, then we need to see a better job being done. And that's why I moved that motion at City Council already, to request that the police provide us the strategy to enhance visibility and enforcement in our neighborhoods. We have an expectation to protect our neighborhoods. There's an expectation to protect those who live in our communities. Mm-hmm. And we expect that the police support whatever strategy we put forward through policy. I'd like to say in conclusion, I think all of us, we're city councilors, but we're also residents of the city. I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm also the father of a 2.5-year-old. And we had a little girl named Sydney Sharma who died because a car hit her in our community 5 years ago. More recently, a little girl in Leaside, Georgia Walsh, was killed. It wasn't because of speed, but it was because she was hit by a car. And it mobilized the community to start a grassroots effort to start slowing down speeds, slow down kids at play. This has gone viral across the country. And what we're doing today is we're not pretending that this is going to solve all ills. It's not going to stop people from speeding, as was said very well and articulately. But it's going to contribute. And we have to take every step based on the evidence that we know to be true to protect our communities. And I'm very proud of us today to take that step. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perk. Are there any questions of the mover? Councillor Perks.
Thank you. I have an amendment to Councillor Matlow's motion. Okay, so the amendment is to add with implementation commencing in September 2015 to Councillor Matlow's motion. I'm going to take a moment to explain technically what that does. You heard in answer to a question the General Manager of Transportation say that we don't have an allocated budget just to pick this $1 million out of. Okay? So during the course of the meeting, we've been having conversations between his department, the legal department, the clerk's department. How does this happen? Currently, the way it happens is we do it street by street, right? We pass a motion here from that intersection to this intersection on ABC Street, reduce the speed to 30. And then at the next meeting, or maybe 2 meetings later, we pass a bill bringing effect to that to be timed with the introduction of the new sign going up, because you don't want to have a speed limit be different than the posted sign. Okay? So the next meeting is September, so there's no way we could have any of these done by then anyway. That's the first step. The second step is we do have a budget allocated for when we do it street by street. And the way it happens is we pass a motion saying we want to put a traffic signal or sign, rather, up on a street, changing the parking hours, reducing the speed, putting in a disabled parking spot, whatever it is. We pass something, and there's a general budget citywide that we draw out of, and it's basically first come, first serve. In 2015, that budget was $11 million. We haven't spent the $11 million yet. So we're going to pass this, and staff can now start implementing it as they can roll out their crews, right? Because they can't get enough crews out to do every street at 30 right away. So starting in September, they will do some of the streets. We will get the necessary bills. We will pass the bills. The signs will go up. Obviously, they can't do all of the streets by the end of this year, so we're all going to turn our eyes very carefully to the 2016 budget. Remember now, councillors, you want to look at the traffic signs and pavement markings line item and make sure that it's larger than $11 million next year. That being said, I also want to point out that the Transportation Department was one of the few departments that overspent last year. They had a positive a variance where they went over by about $4 million. So if they, by some miracle, got all of the signs done by the end of December, it wouldn't be larger than the variance they had last year. So, you know, plug away, guys. On one of the arguments, though, there have been some voices in the conversation saying, oh, you can't do just one piece. You can't do just the speed limit and not the enforcement and not the design. Well, here's the thing. The action we're taking today actually works for all three pieces. If you are driving on a residential street today that is signed 40 and you get caught going 50, you're fine and your points are going to be pretty small. But if you're going 50 and it's signed 30, your points and your fine are going to be bigger. So we are effectively making the penalty for driving 50 on a residential street bigger when we make that street 30. Similarly, when the king of speed humps over there, Councillor Mihevc, wants to get a speed bump in on his street, there's a warrant. The car going 85th fastest, or sorry, 15th fastest out of 100 must be going at least 10 kilometers an hour faster than the posted speed limit. So if today Councillor Mihevc has a street where that car is going at 48 kilometers an hour, he wouldn't meet the warrants and couldn't get the speed bump. But if we make the street 30, oh, it's going faster. So now it does qualify for traffic calming. So we have made the enforcement tougher. We are making the principles that allow us to redesign the streets move along faster. And we're participating and responding to the most successful public education campaign, the Slow Down campaign. So actually the action we're taking today here ties all the elements together, and I'm very proud to be part of this, what I think is the most progressive governing body, save Alberta, anywhere in Canada.
We've got some questions of the mover, Councillor Matlow.
Yes. We'll put partisan politics aside for a moment.
It'll be a national phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure Trudeau would agree with us too. When it comes to the proposed or the estimated $1.1 million that it would take to put up updated signs, did we not hear today that most of our signs actually, because they don't meet standards, might have to be replaced anyway? Did you interpret it that way?
Yeah, so the 1.1 is something we're going to have to spend anyway. It's just an issue of how quickly we decide to spend it.
And then also, just to get a reality check and contextualize this, do we not commonly, as a council, I think there was a recommendation at committee recently to spend, I think, $1.4 million on a handful of wayfinding signs as part of a pilot, where we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on asking for reports or studies to be done in various things too. It's not unusual to ask for funds to invest in certain things. could this not be considered a priority, keeping neighborhoods safe?
Absolutely, it's a priority. Let me put this in context. If you take the 10-year capital plan for the Transportation Department for roadworks, it's about $1 billion. We had a report at the Works Committee just this week, which was looking at maybe putting a 20 or 40% premium on that to get the work done faster, because it's really important that we spend $200 to $400 million to make sure that we have less traffic congestion as a result of construction. That's 200 to 400 times as much money to do this, which would affect the safety, from the staff's own report, of over 100 people a year that are either walking and cycling on residential streets and get struck by a vehicle.
Thank you.
Certainly worthwhile in my view.
Councillor Davis, questions of the mover.
I just want to first comment, that was very good. Sorry.
Right off the top of my head, there you go.
My question has to do with really understanding this implementation.
Right.
So you're saying by taking this route, we would phase in the implementation through the approval of bills coming back month by month to our community council?
Effectively, yes, which is what we would have had to do in any event.
Right.
Because we couldn't do every single street all at once. They simply couldn't get enough people out on the street with enough signs overnight tonight.
Right. So our staff would then figure out a way to do that, phasing in, and then dealing with the budget in 2016.
So we do have a budget
No,
for some of the work to be
I
done this
understand
year.
that.
Yeah.
But they couldn't implement everything. I understand they couldn't do it for a number of reasons.
Yes.
But your proposal will have them implemented based on budget over time.
Well, I was unable to determine how much of the $11 million in the pavement and marking fund line item is already accounted for. It may be that only 10 million is accounted for and we have $1 million in there. But even if that was the case, the limiting factor is getting crews out to physically change the signs fast enough. So they should just, in my view, start getting to work on that as fast as possible, and as the signs go up, bring us the bills, which is what would have happened in any event.
Okay, that's fine. One of the challenges for me certainly is the 50 kilometers, and maybe we'll have to deal with that next.
We would have to deal with that separately because it wasn't part of the notice for the statutory bylaw hearing to do 50-kilometer streets.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cressy is the next to speak.
Thank you, and I'll keep this very brief. First of all, I will, of course, be supporting both the motion and the amendment, and I want to commend Councillor Matlow for working on this for quite some time. To me, this is a very simple issue. It's an issue of safety. It's an issue of safety for residents, for families, for kids, for Torontonians. And the rationale for this, so there are many reasons, but at its core, to me, we are a growing city facing immense pressure and increasing density just in the downtown core, the official plan downtown, where I am a representative along with Councillor McConnell and Wong Tam. We may have 200,000 people living in that downtown core, but we have 750,000 people here every day, people coming through our neighborhoods. And what the medical officers of health's report showed was the highest number of collisions in the City of Toronto or in the Toronto and East York Community Council. It's because this is where people work. So our daytime population increases. This is the area where everyone's coming during the day. And for that reason, we see the highest number of collisions. And for that reason, it makes perfect sense to start here with our delegated authority as a community council. I think we have an obligation to do more. We know that if you're hit at 30 kilometers an hour, your chances of survival are 90%, whereas if you're hit at 45 kilometers an hour, your chances of survival are only 50%. Those numbers on their own should be enough for us to do this today. But I think at its core, this provides consistency. If you're driving in a neighborhood, you know it's 30 kilometers an hour. This makes it easier for drivers as well. And so I think it's incumbent on us to explore any and all options that will ensure safety on our streets, whether that's traffic calming measures like speed bumps, whether that's enforcement, whether that's the speed limit, or as Councillor Perks has noted, what we're doing today in effect accomplishes all of those and more. Ultimately, any death on our street is in a sense a failure on somebody's part, and we should never assume that deaths should be or are a given. Rather, we should focus on complete streets. We should build a safer city. And it seems to me as a community council, when we can act, we should, and we can, therefore we should. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Wong Tam to speak.
Thank you very much. I didn't ask any questions largely because I've read the reports, and I think that there was almost going to be a predetermined outcome of what's going to happen today. Because over the last 4.5 years, my time on this community council, there have been numerous attempts by members to try to keep their neighborhoods and communities safe. So I want to thank Councillor Matlow and Councillor Perks for working on those motions. I agree that we can't get it done soon enough. I actually have a story around traffic and safety, and it goes back to little Kristen, who was probably 9 years old when I got hit by a car. I happen to have survived that accident. It ended up not being a very serious accident. It was a vehicle turning left, and somehow I got in its way. But if you recall, there's the Elmer the safety elephant flag that flies up whenever a young child gets killed. So I was 9. I did not get killed, but I got hit by a vehicle. I survived. 2 years prior, there was another child who did get hit by a car, and that flag flew for him. And as I look at the map in the neighborhood I grew up in the East End, I recognize that I actually was hit at the Riverdale and Poucher area, which is just around the corner from my home. And I think the other child, if I recall correctly, was hit at Gerrard and Carlaw. And the difference between being hit at a major intersection and being struck on a side street was literally the difference between life and death. So I think that, you know, what's before us, and I hope that this story helps illuminate what's at stake, is that, you know, if we're able to keep our communities safe by something as simple as reducing the speed on the roads, that is worth the $1.1 million. And I think that if there was a way for us to go back in time and keep that little boy safe, and to make sure that he was able to get home to his family, I would have happily done it then. Now, we have now seen on numerous occasions, as the years gone by, is that there's this dramatic rise in pedestrian deaths when it comes to vehicle collision. This is not a trend that is going the other way. It is certainly a trend that's going up. There are more pedestrians being killed in this city than there are cyclists and gun deaths combined together, and far exceed that. And I think that, you know, for us to take this initiative, which I understand began in the 1990s, you know, is probably long overdue. I also predict that this will not stop at Toronto East Shore Community Council, because I have family and friends who live across this great city of ours, and I've heard on numerous occasions at cocktail parties, at weddings, at anniversaries, all these stories of near collisions, or perhaps there was a collision. And I think, and I predict, is that this is actually going to start here, but it certainly won't end here. I hope that we're going to see that on our local roads, in residential neighborhoods, that we're going to be able to reduce the speeds to keep families and communities safe. Not only is it good for our kids, so that Elmer, the safety elephant flag, never flies above another school, but it's also good for our seniors in terms of building this age-friendly city where people who are experiencing mobility limitations are going to be able to cross the streets safely, and that cyclists will be able to get from A to B safely. You know, it tells me that when we start to measure, you know, the values of a community, prioritizing the quality of life and the safety for our communities is probably the highest objective and highest outcome that we can achieve at City Council here. And I can't think of a bigger task before us than ensuring that we do everything we can to make sure that people can get home to their families at the end of the day. And it doesn't mean that it's a constitutional right to get there as quickly as possible, but we want you to get there safely. And so for that, I'm very grateful for these motions. I look forward to voting on it. And of course, we're going to have a recorded vote, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks for that. I want to thank all the deputants that came tonight and all those people that spend a lot of time thinking about pedestrians and cyclists and keeping their people safe and keeping their neighborhoods safe. We really rely on you to help us think about these things, so thank you for spending the time on this. This whole notion of this war on the car, when you read all of these documents, it is just so wrong that what has been happening in the city with the number of pedestrian deaths and injuries on streets. There is no war on the car. There's basically been this continued war on people that don't have a car and are walking on the streets. The two reports that I find, there's a number of reports that are very interesting here, and they do seem to clash a little bit. The coroner's report, and I was reminded of that because I was on the Board of Health before, as the mayor said, he was stripped of all his powers, the former mayor. I was stripped of all my committees, and I used to be on the Board of Health till I was stripped of all my committees by the former mayor. But I remember the coroner and this in his report and reading that he recommended reducing speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour on residential streets. And he didn't say you have to have speed humps or else you shouldn't do that. And he didn't say, but if you don't have enforcement, don't do it. He said reduce speeds to 30 kilometers on residential streets. And we have, often you cannot actually deal with the coroner's report and implement it. But in this instance, I think the city's very able to implement this part of the coroner's report. And if we don't implement that, once we know about it, then I think that we are going to be derelict in our duty. That's the first thing. The medical officer of health, on top of that, said that from the coroner's report, took it very seriously and said, you can reduce speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour on residential streets. And I like to call them residential streets. The notion of local roads, a local road, most people have a hard time. What is a local road? Well, I know what a residential street is. It's where people live. It's where we all live. It's where our families go. It's where kids go to school. And so let's call it what it is. It's a residential street or a neighborhood street as compared to an arterial where people are traveling on that to work or to get somewhere else. And I have to say, I'm very concerned, and I hope people don't take this in the wrong way. I'm actually quite concerned over the policy that was recommended to us at council. After reading what the coroner had to say, and then looking at the policy, and I'm not sure how we got to that, because I firmly believe what I said in my questions, that with this policy, we will just have, every time somebody wants 30 kilometers on a local road or their residential street, they will not get it. I don't know any streets in my ward or most wards in Toronto and East York that don't have sidewalks, so we've already lost one of those. We don't have big windy roads. They just go from Gerrard Street to Dundas, straight. So now I've lost 2 of those, and now I can't get them because unless that's just around a school or a park, so I honestly, it's beyond my, it stretched my credibility that this is a warrant now in the city of Toronto. I do believe we need to review that, but because it was done this year, I don't think we can right away, but staff, of course, can review that if they'd like. I'm also concerned that that the cost of this would be $3,000 or $4,000 to start this, get the petition, get everybody, get your petition, and you go down this road where you're never going to get it anyway. I think the road that we're on tonight is really the right one in saying, we're going to make it right for everybody. You don't have to give us a petition and in order to have a safe street at 30 kilometers an hour as recommended by the coroner. You don't have to be special. You don't have to have a Facebook page for your street, so you can do that easily. You can just be a regular old street, and you're going to get a 30 kilometer an hour street in Toronto and East York Community Council. So I look forward to doing that tonight.
Thank you very much, Councillor Fletcher. Next up, I have Councillor Mahavik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a motion based on one of the recommendations from the residents. And the reason why it's worded that way, Mr. Councillor Layton, is that if we send it as a community council, it has to actually go to council, and then that wouldn't be a very helpful strategy. So you writing a letter simply gets it on their agenda, and it allows others to perhaps want to emulate or have sections of their community council emulate what we are doing. And certainly for those of us who live on border wards like myself, there is a desire for some consistency for Councillor Perks, High Park, for myself, Davenport area, and Eglinton area, and I know Leaside, Councillor Burnside may want to also expand this growing area. So I hope you can support that. Mary Margaret as well, and Scarborough immediately to the east. So I think that's a helpful. I hope that's a helpful motion. I'll just very quickly. In my case, after the medical officer of health issued his report, what I did was I went to all the schools in my ward very dutifully, and I asked them, their parent councils, whether they would support such an effort, thinking that the way I could perhaps start this, and the only thing I would be able to get away with, was to establish these zones on streets that touch schools. And believe me, each one of the 10, 12 schools in my ward, they all overwhelmingly, hardly a person said that they did not want this. So I'm quite confident that this has very, very strong support in our neighborhoods. And the other thing that it does, by doing it uniformly, it saves all these communities a heck of a lot of work, and it saves our offices a lot of work. The amount of work that we put into the speed hump process and getting petitions or explaining the petition process is just too much. And this allows us to be uniform and go across the whole community council area. I think the safety reasons have been gone through, the neighborhood reasons have been gone through, the financial issues are not truly an impediment. And I'll give you one more. Issue of consistency. So this is just one ward, this is my ward, and you'll note the circled areas are where we have 30K and speed humps. And you can see, as time goes on, you can see where this is going. This is going the whole ward, if I stay around long enough, will be all 30K zone. And all those areas there have been done one street at a time for 20 years, right? One street gets at the next one. This is an opportunity, frankly, to make it consistent and uniform, and I think from a traffic management perspective, I think that's a desirable thing.
How many met the warrants?
And you know what's interesting? Most of them did not meet the warrants, and we brought it here, and it was overruled because the residents, and I've never seen a case where the residents did not vote 60, 70, 80, 90% in favor of it, despite staff's opinion to the contrary. So lastly, I think we should not oversell this. Having said all the good things, this is only a piece of the puzzle. Complete Streets is about urban design. And I think if we oversell it, I don't think we do our residents justice. They talked about a lot of other things, about how to keep our streets safe, and of course we need to move on to the arterials and the major arterials and the collectors and figure out strategies there. But this is symbolically important, and in substance too, it is also important. But we should not oversell it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Next up is Councillor Davis.
I too will be supporting the recommendation before us, recommendations. I did start out with two motions, but I'm not moving either at this point, and I'll explain them. One of them, well, let me back up. So I believe, based on the good advice that we have received from our medical officer of health, from the coroner's investigation, and the experience in other jurisdictions, that reducing to 30 will affect the speed of traffic on our roads. Will we get 100% compliance? No. And do we need to look at other things like increased enforcement? Yes. So I'm hoping that the report requested by Councillor Matlow or someone about, I think it was Councillor Matlow, and I want to thank you for your leadership on this, that we would see also some focus on enforcement. I could not support the policy that was brought forward by our staff. In the end, I voted for it because I wasn't sure whether or not we were going to see this come to fruition. But we have seen, and everyone has spoken to this, the complexity of going through these multi-warranted exercises that are extremely costly and create an absolute patchwork. And I think that if you look at the amount of, the number of policies we have, like permit parking or parking hours or one-sided or two-sided parking, we have so many inconsistencies in our wards on a whole number of things that I think drive people crazy. I know it's responsive to communities, but sometimes you just need a standard that says this is what it is, and this applies to everybody. That patchwork approach, people can't really figure out where to park or how long they could park, or do they have to go at 5 in the morning or do they have to go at 9 in the morning, that kind of thing. So I just think we need a standardized approach. I will be moving at our first community council a request in September to ask our staff to reduce the speeds on the 50-kilometer-an-hour roads to 30. I was quite struck by the number of roads that continue to be at 50 kilometers an hour, and Councillor McMahon noticed that in her new areas, but there are many old areas in the old East York that remain 50 kilometers an hour, and I would like to make sure that all of the local streets are the same throughout the city. And that's all I have to say, and I was satisfied that with Councillor Perk's amendment that we have a methodology for phasing this in, and we will have to make sure that the funding is adequate in subsequent years to phase it in as quickly as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fragedakis.
So, slow down, kids at play was the cry from a community in pain last summer, and even before that tragedy started that campaign, the number one issue in my ward was traffic calming, and I think it's probably consistent across most wards in the Toronto and East York District. Whether I was at the door during the election or in the pile of petitions that I received, the residents in my ward want their local roads to be calmer. They're concerned about speeding. I hear it constantly, and it is by far their number one complaint. So I now have a good transportation team in my ward, and we're working to address local problems. We're working on traffic and parking problems, on traffic calming, and we're working with local residents, and I'm just not sure we have the tools to get the job done. Even the transportation report, I'm not hearing enough about what we could be doing to address these concerns, just concerns that this might not work as well as people want. And this transportation report doesn't tell me we should not support lower speed limits on local roads. Rather, I see in this report a need to find more tools for dealing with road safety. I believe we need to try this because what we have is not working. What I'm hoping to achieve is greater road safety and more walkable neighborhoods. The two fastest growing demographics in my ward are older people and children. Both groups are cited as being the most in jeopardy when it comes to road safety. The evidence for safer streets is clear. We see report after report saying that lower speed means fewer accidents. Again, report after report says lower speeds mean fewer fatalities. Of course, not just fewer fatalities, but for those who survive, less severe injuries. The clearest statistic is the one that estimates that the risk of a pedestrian fatality at 50 kilometers per hour being twice as high as the risk at 40 kilometers per hour and more than 5 times higher than the risk at 30 kilometers per hour. 5 times. I see beyond the stats. I can see the families. I can hear the exhale of relief in that family when a collision does not prove fatal. I can feel the collective sense of relief across the city when we hear someone survives a tragedy. As one deputant tonight said, when you ask people what is an acceptable level of fatalities in their family, the answer is clear. We must do more. And this initiative will help achieve that. It will save even more lives through the benefits of active transportation. Again, the evidence suggests lower speed limits increases cycling and walking on those streets. More walking and cycling makes the streets, again, even safer for cyclists and pedestrians. That's what the medical officer of health found in his analysis. There's a certain safety in numbers phenomena that means the more cycling and walking makes both safer. It's a sort of a vicious cycle, only this one has a happy ending. Wait, there's more. More walking and cycling makes people healthier. Again, though it's supported by a lot of medical research, I think we can all now understand that people who use active transportation have, on average, a lower risk of obesity and chronic illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, stroke, and some types of cancer. Walking and cycling also have positive impacts on a range of mental health conditions, including anxiety and depression. Again, I see beyond the numbers to the people and their families whose lives will be improved. Some people have raised the issue of cost. I do not want to sound callous, but I think even financially improving our health makes sense. So I'd like to point out that according to the Board of Health's 2012 report, achieving walking and cycling commuting mode shares of 12% and 6% respectively would prevent about 100 additional deaths each year, yielding additional annual benefits of $100 million to $400 million. A further $90 to $120 million would be saved in medical costs. For financial reasons alone, this is probably a wise investment. As well, lowering the speed limits piecemeal will probably cost even more in the long run. As we've heard tonight, there are even more benefits to this initiative. The Transportation Department has talked about the benefits of having a consistent speed limit on all local roads in our area. Our local roads foster cherished community life. Making them safer, making our parents safer, making our children safer only makes sense. So I will be supporting all the motions before us today.
Thank you very much. Councillor McConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take us back a little bit because I think that we need to recognize where we've come from. We've come from a place in which we were not permitted to have a 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit unless we put in speed humps. And what happened in this community council is that we quadrupled and 10 times the number of speed humps that had to go in order to address the issue of speed within our neighborhoods. We have a very densely populated urban area, and as Councillor Matlow indicated, we also have, or I think it was you, no, maybe not, who said that we had 750,000 people coming in every day. Who was it? Sorry, thank you, Joe. And that makes a huge difference when we are looking at developing safe communities, safe neighborhoods where people can live and work and play. In fact, at those particular times, there was a time in which we called these things accidents. I remember that when I grew up, people had car accidents, and sometimes the accident was the child in front of the car. Now we call them collisions, and when I was the chair of the Police Services Board and then the vice chair before, is the same as Councillor Fletcher and all of us, we got removed. It was a talk about the war on. Anyway, the war was on, stripped of our powers. We were beginning at that time to have to address the growing number of people who were being killed in road collisions. either by pedestrians, either cyclists, and also drivers. So for me anyway, you know, this is an artificial polarization of people, because at the end of the day, we need to have a city that is able to survive by having downtown neighborhoods as well as suburban neighborhoods. And we need to be able to keep children safe in all parts of the city, but particularly here. And one of the things that really upset me about the TEYCC report was this notion of warrants, because I had to fight warrants when we amalgamated, because the warrants didn't make any sense in our downtown urban densified neighborhoods. And so for me, I was very concerned, because I saw those warrants and I thought nobody's ever going to be able to manage those. So, you know, we're going to have to put speed bumps everywhere in order to get to 30 kilometers. I was also concerned because I represent a community, a very diverse community, and also within that, many of my people are quite disempowered. But mine are a lot more empowered than many other neighborhoods who are in poor neighborhoods. And I know perfectly well that they would not have the ability to get speed reduced in their areas. And so when I did the poverty reduction and went into some of those neighborhoods, in Scarborough, in Rexdale, in Malvern, in Jane Finch, I can tell you there's absolutely no way that they would be able to do that on their own without counselors who would help them. So I'm just going to finish off by saying, as part of this little piece of remembrance, I'm just going to say we have a little ways to go. Just about 8 years ago, a little girl was born in Africa. Her mother stayed there for 6 months because she had the community of her birth to help her. And then she joined her father here in my community, in one of my TEYCC buildings on Esplanade and Jarvis. And they arrived at 3 o'clock in the afternoon by plane. And so the father, for the first time, got to see his daughter. She was about 6 months old. And they went for an evening stroll, I'm sure, as you often have taken your child and all of us.
Early evening.
And when they returned, they had to cross Jarvis Street. And when they came across Jarvis Street, somebody came off the Gardner and was right out of control and went right through the red light. And as a result, the father jumped in front of that carriage. He was cut in half, and the mother was murdered. And as a result, we have a little 8-year-old somewhere who lives in Mississauga, doesn't live in the neighborhood that she was brought up in, and doesn't have the opportunity to have her 2 parents who loved her dearly. And I just think that when you know those stories, and there are lots of them around this city, that how can you not do something? And yet I would remind us that even this small step today will not help in that situation, because Esplanade, as much as it's a neighborhood residential street, has a bus on it and therefore is ineligible. And Jarvis, although...
Councillor, I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Also does not qualify. So we have a long way to go in order to address this, but this is a first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to support Councillor Matlow's great crusade. It's a step towards making Toronto safer. But I think we still have a little ways to go with, and I'd like to explore, as hopefully we will be, the pavement markings. They do pavement markings all over the world, Japan, European cities. They're fantastic. They're great visuals, especially for daydreaming drivers. And I'd like to also explore more mobile speed trailers. I think, like, when I'm driving, that really freaks me out. And not that I speed all the time, but I know it freaks me out, and I think it is the one thing that does it's kind of a wake-up call to people. We have 4. We are just hearing from Stephen Buckley. We have 4 of them. I know 55 Division has 1, and I usually have to arm wrestle Councillor Fletcher to get that 1 mobile speed trailer over 32. I'm even tempted to spend some of my office budget on buying my own mobile speed trailers, 1 or 2 for Ward 32. I hear they're only about $8,000, so it's a steal, really. And also, the other thing is we have to explore this 50K. I'm shocked that we would be building subdivisions that would be 50K automatically. And so I want to visit those, revisit those areas in my ward that are 50K. I have many residents, especially in the Ted Reeve area, that are very concerned about their 50K. So we have to look at that. Hopefully in September we'll be able to bring that back here. The number 1 issue in my office is traffic calming, is cars, traffic calming, speeding, volumes of vehicles. And we have to remember, and we have to try and remind Torontonians and get everyone on board that roads belong to everyone. They belong to people who drive, people who bike, people who walk, people who play ball hockey, albeit illegally. We tried to legalize that, Councillor Matlow and I. And they belong to people who host street parties. And it adds to better quality of life, which is what we aspire for our great city, and happy to support this.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Bailao has indicated she would like to complete the set of all councillors
Very
speaking.
briefly, because I know we're all looking forward to go home. But I think we're heading definitely in the right direction. I mean, what we heard here over and over is how much time and effort we put through our offices to make our streets safer. And automatically that is time and effort from our staff as well. So I think we're being efficient in here. We're definitely trying to take an efficient and proactive approach. And I think there needs to be an attitude shift, and that's what I think we're trying to do in here. We need to think of our roads for pedestrians, for drivers, for cyclists, for communities. And that's the direction that we're moving in here, so I think we're moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to be very brief, like many of you, next to off-leash dogs and parking issues, the speed of traffic on Residential Street are right up there with the number of calls that my office gets, pretty much right on the top of the list. So I'm comfortable voting in favor of all of the motions. I think if there was any better reason to do this than public safety, if there was any other reason why we were all here and have been hired, it is public safety. All the way from the World Health Organization recognize that setting speed limits and enforcing them is the most effective way of limiting and reducing the number of accidents. 1 kilometer decrease, 1 kilometer per hour decrease is a 2 to 3% reduction in the number of road collisions. So we've got the WHO going from around the world down to our coroner's report and our medical officer of health. These are all the professionals that we ask for advice on public health matters. They have all indicated one thing. Yes, it's not the only thing, and we do need to be investing in all of those other elements, but I think this helps serve those enforcement and other reduction efforts. Just very quickly, I think we also see that the consistency argument needs to be there, and it's better off that we are consistent in all our way in all that we do, just to make it easier on those navigating the streets, and the additional bonus of there actually being a rather strong budget argument for it. I just wanted to make one quick observation that I was asked a question by one of the media outlets who said that one of our colleagues from another community council said, well, how are you going to enforce it? And I said, you know what would be great? What if the city hired a whole lot of people, maybe its largest budget item, to enforce the regulations on all of our streets and all of our traffic regulations. Wouldn't that be great? Perhaps it's something that we should add to the city budget. Well, of course, clearly some of you in the room are getting tired and not getting the sarcasm with it. We do spend almost $1 billion or over $1 billion a year on just those very people to enforce bylaws on our roads. And as well as do a number of other things, but one of the things is enforce those bylaws. So I think we do have all the elements there. I think it's rather short-sighted to try to pinhole this into this argument on the war on this and the war on that and trying to slow people down. It's not. It's trying to make people safe. And with that, I'm going to propose that we vote on all the motions, and then as item as amended, we'll do a recorded vote. Does that make sense for everyone? So on the first motion, this is the motion from Councillor Matlow. From Councillor Perks to amend Councillor Matlow's motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. On Councillor Matlow's motion, all those in favor all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. On Councillor Mahavic's motion, I'm writing a letter. All those in favor? Opposed? 3 letters. I'll write a 4th just for fun. And on the item as amended, recorded vote. All those in favor, Councillor Bailao, Councillor McMahon, Councillor Matlow, Councillor McConnell, Councillor Perks, Councillor Fragadakis, Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Layton, Councillor Cressy, Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Mahavic, Councillor Davis. That is unanimous. And Councillor Matlow, you have the confirming bill. Oh, Councillor Bailao, sorry. You have the confirming bill.
Right, that the Toronto and East York Community Council pass and declare as a bylaw a confirmatory bill to confirm the legislative proceeding of the Toronto and East York Community Council acting under delegated authority at meeting on June 22nd, 2015.
All those in favor? Opposed? Meeting adjourned.
I'm proud of us.
You going home or you coming here? Yeah. Where?
All right, and what do you think about the fact that sounds great. Okay, so